I say that we should start with talking about why we're here. Again, like a little gentle overview, especially of the reason why we're in Regalport to begin with. So This is kind of what we covered last stream, but just a little short one, just a little short recap. All right, if you scroll down, I'm going to start writing about the Snapdragons. So,
all right.
You can recap your deepest trauma, and I will let you know. Because the Snapdragons are kind of like, why
the reason
are
we're
we
there.
in Regalport to begin with? So what do you know about the Snapdragons, Rom?
Well, for my character, N, the Snapdragons are kind of enemy numero uno, and that is due to the fact that 5 years ago they kidnapped N and replaced their eyeball with some weird magical eldritch eyeball and forced them to watch a snuff theater performance where multiple other victims were killed right in front of them. So you can imagine they might be a bit upset about that. N does not know the real name nor the reason why this group did this. They've been called the Snapdragons after the theater in which the incident took place. But N has had no luck really processing, remembering, or dealing with any of that trauma for the past 5 years until more recently, when they encountered at a theater in Regalport a man by the name of Sir Edmund Beckett. We hate Sir Edmund Beckett in this house.
Hey, everyone flip off your screens. Double thumbs up. What am I trying to say? What's this one? Double middle
Flip
fingers
the bird.
up. Yes, flip 2 birds.
Flip a flock of birds at this man.
Yep.
Yes. And he...
jumping from the ceiling with their feathery cape on.
Yes.
I flip you the bird. Kicks you in the face.
I have knives. And they're going in you. So that tells you about what kind of man Edmund Beckett is. But to give you a little more context, he was at the Snapdragon Theater when the incident occurred. He was a member of the audience. So seeing him again 5 years down the road was not a great time, and kind of galvanized N into using him as their starting point for hunting down the Snapdragons, all of them, whoever was involved in all of that, and stopping them from a repeat performance of what happened at the Snapdragon Theater, as it were. So N began to track Edmund's movements around Regalport, which started at the Gallery of Shadows where they first saw him, which is a Thorani-owned theater. Thorani is the offshoot of House Fjarlin, which are both like arts houses in the universe of Eberron.
Offshoot. Baron Elar looks at you like, offshoot. Do you want to word that again? Knives to your throat.
No, I'm good.
Like a weed, is what you're saying.
Oh, I guess it depends who you ask, doesn't it? Maybe if you asked Sir Edmund Beckett, he would agree with me, which, yeah, maybe if you had presented that idea to me, I would want to reword it, but that's not what we're talking about at this point. Yep. They are an extension of Fjarlin. They are their cousin twice removed of House Fjarlin.
Removed makes throat slitting gesture. You know what I mean?
Yes. So, Edmund was involved in the Snapdragon event, and his movements in Regalport started at the Gallery of Shadows, and then he left Regalport for a while, but leaving behind his butler, and was able to gather information on when he would be returning to Regalport, which turned out to be a new Corvair art auction that was going to take place a few months later, and filled that time with other such adventures. But when we return to the 3 months later, when Edmund Beckett is slated to return, and also notices a article in the local Regalport newspaper, which details the death of someone nobody knows at this point. We don't know their name or who they were or anything about them, but the newspaper details that they have been found dead at a flop house, which is not attributed to anything sinister right off the bat. They considered it might have been an overdose and not like homicide or anything. There was no like clear indicator of what did the deed in this case to our friend Kay Kelson, who's we will find out is the name of the victim later on. But what catches N's eye about this particular article is it mentions that Kay Kelson, we'll just refer to them by his name, now, which we'll find out later, is missing his eyes. And the article attributes that to vermin eating the eyes, but N is not so convinced because N has a bit of a tunnel vision in regards to the situation that they are trying to solve. That is the Snapdragon situation. The what, why's, when, where's, how's. So N decides to go and investigate just to see if there's anything to solve about this missing eye situation. And
spoilers.
There is.
They were correct.
As far as I can tell, yes, we still haven't like found Kelson's eyeballs anywhere, but all signs are pointing to yes, Kelson did have some sort of dubious circumstances surrounding his death. Yeah, we'll get into that later. But needless to say, yes, investigating Kelson led them to suspecting, well, they found a trace of red paint or lacquer in Kelson's room, which really lended to the idea that someone with artistic inclinations, which the Snapdragons do fall into that category, might have been involved in Kelson's, what we are assuming at this point, murder. So that only bolstered N's interest in investigating the event that Edmund Beckett would be attending that month, the art auction. So equipped with both the information that Edmund would be attending the art auction and wanting to pursue him in this public venue, as well as investigate the red paint that was found at Kelson's in Kelson's room where he died, allegedly, where his body was found at least. Yeah. And recruited Willow and Luca and Damon to join them at the Grand Auction Hall during its auctioning event, the new Corvair Art Gallery and auction event, to pursue these leads.
Yes. And thus we end up with, and this is where the title card flashes across the screen, Death of the Artist. Which actually came up before we knew, A, that Kelson was an artist, and B, that there was going to be another death.
Yes.
So that's just funny. I guess not like haha funny, but it is kind of funny. Oh. And I do want to mention that the Snapdragons also, like, their magic skills include, like, so I say their MO is kind of like targeting vulnerable. They have a focus on tragedy and suffering for entertainment.
Yes.
And eye stuff is like the only way I can think to put it.
Yeah.
Injuries related to the eye, removing eyes, that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's why the missing eyes noted in Kelson's death. Yeah, pinged something for N.
Yeah. And also that their skills include, so the things that N is like scared of in this circumstance. Sorry, do you want me to say scared of? The thing that N is wary of in these circumstances is like mood affecting magic, mind reading magic, what's the thing? Like puppeteering kind of things. Like if you can think of spells that would have to take away your like autonomy, or see. They removed your changeling mask, didn't they?
Yes.
Is that? Do you suspect that that's like magical? Are we supposed to suspect that's magical?
I believe so.
Yeah. So like anything that you can associate with like violation of your, like, what am I trying to say? Your I don't know, your humanity for starters.
Yeah.
But also like just your control
self.
over self, like your agency, your autonomy, yourself in general. It's just like they're like that.
Yeah.
Think of like psychic and psychic hypnosis magic almost is how I would interpret it. As someone who isn't like familiar with D&D, that's how I have been thinking of it. They are puppeteers of an evil, evil little circus. And they're gross for that. But those are the kinds of traits that we were looking out for around in Regalport.
Yeah. And I'll also say that Anne at this point doesn't know how they were initially like subdued was through magical or drugs, like magical means or drugs, when they were first kidnapped by the Snapdragons.
Yeah.
And one of the other attributes of Kelson was that his death was attributed to an overdose. So Ed was also like, cannot say for sure that was an element in their own kidnapping, but they can't say it wasn't. So
yeah,
that was another thing that made them think this might have something to do with the Snapdragons more than not.
Yeah. And when we say drugs too, that also, like, spoilers, Tarek Elham was poisoned. I feel like that includes, like, any kind of substance used to inhibit your, like, function, basically.
Yes. Yeah. Guess who else gets drugged later on in our arc?
We'll talk about him later, dumbass. Bro, you completely threw me off. Like, I just got Lucas' dumb face in my mind, like the moon. Smiling down at me.
Anyway, like a stupid pizza
I know. That's a dumb fuck. What was I up to? Snapdragon MO. Also, what was I gonna say? We've started to identify or relate them to aberrations in the Dalkir, because N was attacked by a Nothic, or captured by a Nothic, or halted by a Nothic. I don't know how you would interpret that. And we later discovered something beholder, but we don't know what and how it's related yet. But I am personally now associating like aberration stuff with
Dalkir and aberration
Snapdragons.
stuff. Both seem like they have certain connections with Snapdragons.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I'll say like something related to aberrations and Dalkir. And I think that's important too, because like when we first tried to figure out what N's eye was, one of the first leads was like Kyber or Zoriat.
Yeah.
And that's related to that. The whole concept of like the madness that they seem to be feeding on seems very much aligned. These all feel like pieces that have aligned over the course of the entire campaign.
Yeah.
To paint a little ugly picture of the kinds of people that we're dealing with. And it's bad. I think the best metric is that our strongest group member, Damon, does't like the idea of talking about it. Like, because it's like, well, if you get into that situation, don't.
Yeah.
If you see an aberration, don't approach it. If you see a Dalkia, don't fight it. And Willow's like, like jotting all of this down, like, okay, so we're going to have to, but
now
you don't
say,
have to. Like,
now say we don't have a choice in the matter. What then?
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay. Far out. So that's that. God. I also just want a quick aside. For those who know Damon, it took me the other day after stream to remember that Willow is the one that actually suggested to involve Damon, I believe.
Yeah.
Willow brought him on, suggested to N, like, do you want to tell him about your woes in this particular circumstance so he can help? And I vaguely remember N being like, what? And then being like, okay, yeah. Right. Like that kind of flow. Like, why the hell would I tell Damon? Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Not their natural inclination, but once it's pointed out to them, yeah, they can see the benefits.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because then now he's here and he's definitely given us a lot to work with. He's definitely been indispensable. Is that the word I'm looking for? In terms of like knowledge and wisdom and just generally being humongous and such and rich. But also the fact that we're getting here and he's kind of like, ugh, that seems yuck. Let's not get involved. And we're like, oh shit, sorry, I already involved you.
Signing Damon up on the guest book, like, what?
Oh, deeply sorry, I already used your email to sign up to this account. I hope you don't mind. Damon's like, what?
By the way, did you need that credit card information? Because
I just gave it to Edmund Beckett. Also, what's true sight? Anyway, so Damon's aside, he's going to keep sporadically popping up because that is my lease in life. Our lease. Our lot in life.
That is the nature of both his character and our circumstance, so...
Yeah. But the important thing is, Snapdragons. We know their MO, and we had reason to believe that this art gallery would hold answers for us. And boy, did it. Let's talk about Tarek.
Tarek.
Actually, no. Sorry. Let's not talk about Tarek. Let's talk about the sea dragons.
Not to be confused with the snapdragons. We have another dragon here that starts with S and ends in dragons.
Yeah, we have sea dragons, snapdragons, dragon slayer, and then the draconic prophecy, which cannot be. All of these are different things. Presumably, looks at Damon and the prophecy like, But
we'll see.
The sea dragons are the principality or the pirate fleet that is their base is Regalport, which is where we're currently staying. Our whole plot started in Salvage, which is next door to Regalport. So politically attached in the sense of like, if something hits Regalport, it might filter out to Salvage. You know?
Yeah.
Or if it doesn't hit Regalport, then subsequently might not filter out to Salvage. That kind of thing. They are pretty close. So
they're linked enough that one will feel the effects of the other a little bit.
Yes. So the principalities became a recognized nation after the Treaty of Thronehold, which is the end of the war, the treaty that everyone signed, like, war, let's not do that. Also, because Syria exploded. Syria spelled C-Y-R-E, just in case anyone hasn't made that connection yet, because I said Saya for like the first few episodes.
Me too.
What's the word? Yeah, I think we all did. So when that was signed, the principalities were recognized as a nation. High Prince Rhaegar was there to sign it. So he's kind of like the big dog of the Lazar principalities. And that kind of makes Regalport a pretty important place on the east side. Zeke always reminds me, he is not in complete control of the principalities. He hasn't like fully reconciled or consolidated the east coast of Corvair. Like, he isn't that powerful yet, but he is important in this area of the world. And he's thrifty with making alliances. One of the alliances that was existing before even the Treaty of Thronehold was signed, I guess not an alliance, but one of the, like, what's a proper way of saying bum chums? One of my chums, one of my bros in Regalport was House Thorani. So after House Thorani's beef with House Fiallan back in Shan, presumably, was at the HQ?
Fiallan Fiallan has a few places, so I always get confused. I know, like, one of them is,
multiple HQs.
Yeah, one of them is in, Sharn Brayland /Brayland, but I also know, like, they had one in Siri before Siri exploded, so.
Yeah. That makes sense. Every time we say before Siri exploded or Siri exploded, it just feels so, insensitive, but it kinda did. So,
it's our best shorthand.
Yeah. So basically, wherever Fiallan was, Thorani used to be Fiallan, but then they split away. Was it 30 years ago? Was that the Shadow Schism? Yeah. And one of the places that they, I think, started making their HQ, or I have notes about this actually. Let me bring up Horget. Horget Black. What's his name? I think it's Horget.
It is Horget.
Yeah.
Unfortunate.
You cannot forget it. Okay, so Horget Black, the prince of the sea dragons that preceded Rhaegar. He was the one that invited House Thorani to Regalport, but Rhaegar continued the relationship and deepened it. I can't recall if they were considered an alliance prior to Rhaegar, because Rhaegar's a very alliance-minded kind of guy. Love that guy. But fact is now that you can say that the principalities are kind of defined by the relationships that they're beginning to make among themselves and with the houses. So all of the houses, House Thorani, whatever. But the alliances that they do make also determine who isn't there. For example, because of the alliance with the Whisperers and such, House Lyrander isn't there. That isn't the only reason. Lyrander already had beef with this side of the place. But, you know...
Yes.
It's certainly solidified that, Lyrander's not passing through this neck of the woods, because we have buddies over there that hate Lyrander. Everyone fucking hates Lyrander.
So I've heard.
And also, House Orion is also the other, what's the word? Competition for House Lyrander. So, similarly, the way I've interpreted it is that for as long as House Thorani is here, House Fiallan
is not.
Probably isn't. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
they'll be civil with
reason-
each other on the surface, but that's just to keep them away.
Yeah,
from
like
one
for
another.
if
Gated, like two cats in the
yeah.
same house, just
yeah.
put a baby gate between them. Two baby gates, really, to cover the entirety of the door because they can jump, and you never know where they're going to end up.
Yes. So it's kind of like, you know, House Thorani, hey, you've been invited to Regalport, you can have a nice time here, which also means not letting your shit-ass family that you left and had a big spat into the neighborhood, you know? That's important to note because the theater that N burnt down was House Fiallan owned.
Yes.
And I don't remember if we have actually determined anything about Edmund Beckett's relationship with House Fiallan.
He
Because he's more just like
sponsors
a
young
relish
talent
fan.
to House Fiarlan.
Right, so he has a certain allegiance, we can assume, to House Fiallan in whatever way.
Yes.
And this is information that becomes vaguely important later. So in short, Sea Dragons handshake House Thorani, no handshake House Fiallan, thus Sea Dragons no handshake, presumably House Fiallan. Yeah?
Presumably. Especially since Ryger has Thorani assassins watching his back.
Yes, that's very important because in the Principalities, if you challenge the prince to a duel, in the Sea Dragons specifically, if you challenge the prince to a duel and you win, you are the new prince. Ryger is such an assassinable man, you know? So House Thorani isn't just the theater people who are bringing in, like, you know, they bring people through town. This whole art exhibition is proof that House Thorani creates an industry that will now create traffic through Regalport, which is important for like business and thriving
Puts
in general.
Regalport on the map.
Yeah,
the
Regalport
flow of funds.
Yeah, Regalport and like whatever Thorani does in Regalport benefits the Sea Dragons because it's the Sea Dragon port. But simultaneously, they are also, air quotes, secretly the assassin house. The same way that Fiallan is, air quotes, secretly the spy house. So, but seeing as they came from that house, it's like, well, so we know from meeting Ryger that he is also protected by House Thorani. So that is an important alliance that seems to be mutually beneficial of like, you make sure I don't get my head cut off when I'm not looking, and I'll make sure that you guys don't, you know, have to get shoved across Corvair to find a new HQ, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Get bullied by your family.
Bully is one way to put it.
Bully to death. That alliance is probably going to be useful to know.
A little bit.
Yeah. Anyway, Tarek Elham.
Tarek Elham.
Yeah. Our guy.
This
Here
motherfucker.
comes the guy. He's gonna die. Spoilers.
So, this guy's dead.
Yeah. Don't get attached to him. Or do. Huh? We'll get into that later. This is Tarek Elham. Do you want to do some introductory thoughts or shall I?
You go ahead.
Okay. So he's a playwright and he's a poet from Siri. Siri is the place that exploded, and the explosion of Siri led to the end of the war, the signing of the Treaty of Thronehold. Siri's like at the center of the map, and where we currently are at Regalport is like as furthest east as you can get on the continent, basically.
Siri is listed as the Mournlands here on the map.
Yeah, are you showing the map?
Yeah.
Smart. So yeah, his homeland, which is now the Mournlands, or the Mournland, was struck by like a magical calamity, which we later discover that he witnessed, as an aside, like while he was on a train leaving Siri, like evacuating. And his art basically all reflects that. And the primary thing that he has created recently, God, Wolfred stabs me in the back for referring to the opera as a thing, is an opera called The Folly of the Four Sons, which did debut in Regalport, in a House Thorani theater.
Yes.
Which is named the...
Gallery of Shadows.
Yes, and I'm going to hand over to Ron because when's the first time we heard about this gallery?
It was when Anne took a job as a body double for a captain by the name of Frostroot, who had tickets to the show but had other matters to attend to at the time. So hired a body double, and Anne is a changeling, to attend the Folly Opera in her stead. And seeing as that kind of work is Anne's current bread and butter, Anne took the job without too much thought, which they would later regret? Question mark?
Question mark.
Because this is also what led them to encountering Edmund Beckett, but we have yet to determine if that was a bad thing necessarily. Either way, yes. So
just staying quiet.
Wearing the visage of Frostroot, and attended the debut of The Folly of the Four Sons, which was written by Tarek Elham. And yeah, that's when we first heard about Tarek, and that's when we first saw his play, and the only time we've seen his play, really, was when Anne was masquerading as Captain Frostroot to take her place in the audience.
Yeah, which is sus, but...
We'll get into that in a moment.
Yeah, well, I'll spoil in advance. The fact that she wasn't at the event hasn't actually come up in the murder mystery at all. This might be completely unrelated. We don't know yet. But
future evidence does make it a strange choice that she would not want to attend this debut.
Yes. So, magnum opus, magnus opus. Oh, my magnum open.
That's what you do. That's when you kill a guy with a magnum.
Magnum open. Bro, let's talk. God.
We warned people I have free range now.
God. Anyway, so Anne is the only one among us that has seen the play. It was a big deal. It was a massive deal in Regalport. It showed on the anniversary of the Day of Mourning, which is the day that Siri exploded. And people traveled from all over Corvair to come see it, including who Anne said, Sir Edmund Beckett.
He's from Sharn, which is in Breland, which is, if you once again direct your attention to this map here, a decent ways away from the Lazar Principalities, which is in the upper right corner of the map, and Breland is closer to the lower left.
Yes. Although, as we were reminded, not that far by boat.
And also Edmund can teleport, so
Edmund can teleport. So
he's
rich.
Yeah. He has a private jet. Yeah. Which is another reason to kill him. Anyway.
Fish. Okay. The other thing that is important too is the play itself features two very important names from House Thorani. So the main character in the play is the princess. It's basically like a retelling of the War of Succession, like the princess, the nations that didn't let her be a ruler and that kind of stuff. And then everything explodes and dies horrifically, basically. Yes. So the princess in that play is played by Lydia de Thorani, who is the daughter of the head of House Thorani, and the head of House Thorani is Baron Ela de Thorani, who we will show you later. Partly because he's important, also partly because he's very handsome.
Two very, very valuable things to know.
Yes. So kind of a big deal. If the head of the house is in your play, it's kind of unprecedented. So this is a play that is both like creatively groundbreaking, but also politically relevant. Very politically charged. So this is important because Tarek Elham is kind of like a darling of House Thorani, who is not actually from the family. So like he has been employed by the family as like, he's kind of a big deal. He's kind of really good at his job. He wrote a banger play. Let's work with him to bring it to life. And then he was brought to death. But that's not here yet. Let's talk about him at the actual auction. Rom, do you want to talk about Tarek, like how he was at the auction? Bad?
Yeah,
just tell us how we entered the room. Huh?
Well, how we were introduced to Tarek. We entered the gallery, us and our little entourage, Damon and Willow and Luca. We entered the gallery and we were greeted by a statue by one of the artists there of a dragon. And how we first met Tarek was him waltzing into the room, taking one look at this statue and berating the hell out of it and calling it infantile nonsense. In front of the artist, by the way, the sculptor was standing next to his big old dragon statue. And Tarek just,
killed him.
Yeah, emotionally, spiritually, with words. So Tarek spoke his mind, and his mind was rough, to say the least. It was rough to hear his opinion, so blunt. So bluntly. And maybe he was correct, but it certainly was.
You shouldn't say it.
It certainly was a particular vehicle of delivery with which he presented these ideas to the rest of the room, which was out loud in front of the audience and without any restraint.
He worded that so diplomatically. That's like so unnecessarily diplomatically. Like he doesn't deserve it. At this stage, he's just a little bit of a bitch. I just posted a picture of Errol while saying that he's a bit of a bitch. Yeah, I just want people to see the person that.
This is Errol Duterani, who is the sculptor of the statue. Tarek introduced himself via insulting.
Yeah. Tarek literally walked into the room, went, "Yuck! Look at that atrocious thing!" And I will say, in his defense, because that's a thing that I've been doing lately, apparently, Tarek has very real-world trauma from the war.
Yes.
And Errol's depiction of the war was a very, la-di-da, we can idealize away the horrors of war because of some bullshit notion of some paternal figure that's gonna make everything better because of wisdom and dumb shit. Like, basically, Errol comes from a place of naivety, and Tarek has no time for it because it's hollow and shit. Tarek is the guy who made a stage show that's basically like, the ending is that everyone fucking dies. Because that's how it turned out, bitches, and I won't let you forget it. Like, that kind of angle. He is a very heated kind of making a statement kind of person, and I respect it. I mean, might as well say something. And then walk into the room and then basically just backhand the nearest sheltered elf that's sitting there. Like, well, don't be so vapid, you dumb shit. And then walk through the room.
Arrow was placed at the entrance of the whole event, so he's going to take he's going to take the brunt of whoever is entering's opinion of what's going on. Yeah. Maybe he should have just sculpted something better.
Maybe if you didn't want to get scolded by Tarek Elham, you should just be better at your job. Yeah. Or choose another profession. Look, I don't necessarily agree with being like a wild dickhead to whoever, but like, he had his reasons. I don't want it to sound like it was completely unprompted. However, as we learn later, he might have had more reasons than just what we expected. But, oh god. Moral of the story is that Tarek Elham walked into the room shitty. He was in a shit mood, it seemed.
Yeah, it was quite a confronting attitude to be introduced to the gallery via.
Yeah. Use in real report, 18 of the 5th. Immediately crushes Errol Duterani's artistic efforts. I will say that it's not just that everyone died in Tarek's play, it's kind of like the defiant survival of Siri thing. It's an interesting play, which you can read on Zeke's Coffee if you want to. Or you can go back and rewatch episode 10.
Yes, also true.
Yeah, where Zeke basically sits for 10 minutes and tells us the entire opera, and it's awesome! I love it, I need to re-listen to it. So, Tarek's got the shits this evening, it seems. Miraldine is with him, and apparently they are a couple. So him and the the pirate lady below, they are a couple. This is the one that Miraldine is the one that N impersonated 3 months ago in canon. So kind of a big deal too, because we did not know that they were an item until now. She was just like, oh, we're close. But like a couple close, we didn't know that. She's a big deal because she is a sea dragon captain. Which I'll add now, because I feel like we kind of learn about them in tandem. Sea dragon captain. What's the name of her ship again? Oh yeah! Captain's the Silver Dancer, which is relevant for other reasons.
Other kettle of fish that is not important right now.
And impersonated her for the big debut of FOFS, which is what I call the Folly of the Four Sons. And she was doing like damage control this evening, it seemed, with Tarek. I just remember her being like, oh, nothing beats your highbrow. Come on, let's mingle. And like took him away.
Drags him along into the gallery. Like, let's leave Arl to cry. I think you've done enough for tonight.
and he did. He literally Arl. Oh, you little shit. So Tarek was what else happened with Tarek that night? He met up with a friend, it seemed. He congratulated, so he wasn't completely sour all evening. He congratulated Warfred Bartosz, another dwarven fellow, another artist,
presenting his work at the art auction. That was one Warfred Bartosz. So yes, we observed Tarek speaking with Warfred and congratulating him on getting his piece into the art show / auction.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Despite how Tarek seemed to be openly disturbed by the piece Warfred had on display.
Very true. Tarek was like visibly upset by it, and Warfred was like, it is the purpose of art to disquiet you. And which is something that Tarek seems to agree with, which is, why his art is so confronting. Doesn't really, it's kind of relentless. But we'll talk about Warfred later. That is probably one of the only positive interactions I can remember for Tarek that evening. Well, other than my own, but we'll get to that. So the next notable moments for Tarek that evening was the argument with Dragovich, I believe.
Yeah.
So this guy, Dragovich, was going around the auction being a shit bastard.
An inflammatory, warmongering bastard, essentially.
Means. Yeah. And Tarek decided to call him out on it. Do you want to cover this while I type?
Sure. Yeah, so the next time we really spot Tarek is him getting into an argument with this guy, Stanislav Dragovich, because essentially Dragovich supports the war and Tarek does not, to put it in the most simplest terms.
Honestly. Dragovich basically started a fight that was like, and everyone thinks the war was necessary, right? And Tarek Elham, who's like, I fucking saw my nation explode, you bitch, steps forward like, no! So that's...
Yeah, so Tarek basically called Dragovich out when he was talking about one of the paintings at the gallery and how it was just kind of nonsense and ridiculous because, war is so good. Actually, I'm paraphrasing a lot, but this is the general vibe. And Tarek was like, don't be a son of a bitch. War is bad. People died, and you're just a bloodthirsty hound. And Dragovich didn't take too kindly to that, so started to fight back. And it got heated, very heated, and resulted in Tarek having to storm out of the gallery. Miraldine also interjected in this whole debacle and challenged Dragovich to a duel in her boyfriend's honor.
Honor, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so hot of her.
It is very
so
sexy.
hot for that. Yeah.
But it was clear there was a certain degree of bad blood, at least insofar as like personal ideals and politics between Dragovich and Tarek. That was on display for everyone to see in that moment. Mm-hmm. And Tarek became so upset by this interaction that he excused himself from the gallery and went to the bathrooms to gather his composure.
Yes. Which is where I come in. So, at the bathroom, Willow having perceived all of this, and Willow is also, air quotes, from Ciri. This is a question that's kind of at the forefront of this entire arc, is that Willow has just recently admitted to everyone that they basically have not looked back home since the morning happened, or even before. But like, the impression that you're supposed to be getting is that like they haven't gone back because they are afraid of the outcome of the nation exploding, because they couldn't really handle the outpouring of survivors that ended up where they were, which was the principalities. So like the premise is like, if I cannot even look at, for example, I don't know, Damon or any other person who is suffering as a result of the mourning, then how the hell am I going to go back? Like that kind of logic, and see whether my family survived it. So Willow's basically been stuck here for like 5 years going, 4 years? I think 4 years since the mourning. So yeah, Willow has not gone back, and this is kind of like a cornerstone of their entire character that's getting like thoroughly explored in this arc. 994. 20th of Olaroon 994. So Tarek Elham's kind of a big deal considering he is kind of their opposite in a lot of ways. He is very much like dedicated to the memory of Ciri and forcing people to confront it with his art, and also with the way he dresses and the way he speaks. The way he dresses is known as, he's wearing mourning wear. Is that what it's called, Ron? I remember you corrected. You mentioned it last round. Which is to say he's wearing clothes in the style of his home country, but all in black. And so he's like constantly reminding people that his nation was like wrongfully exploded, or that the horrors that saw his home country devastated by war is something he like represents on the daily. So basically he scares the shit out of Willow as a concept. So tonight though, Willow's feeling brave because they've had a series of like build-ups from just before this arc that have encouraged them to confront that past and make steps to go and deal with it. So they decide to follow Tarek to the bathroom. That's my long build up to say that they finally convinced themselves to go see Tarek and to check on him and like offer any kind of human condolence to him. And I will say, I think literally other than Damon, this is the first time Willow would have done that in the past 4 years since they ran away from the other survivors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
significant interaction massively, to say the least.
Yeah. Now everyone remembering, like, wait a minute, doesn't he die? Yeah.
So
Willow swallows their nerves, goes to speak to him, and then Tarek, I would say that is the only soft part of the evening that he has, which is after Willow expresses that they are also from Ciri, kind of. When I say kind of, it's because the border moved over Willow's hometown during the war. So the borders of Ciri currently don't technically include where Willow's from, because Willow's hometown was under occupation, military occupation, from in Dagun, basically, which also became a nation after the treaty. No, wait, before the treaty. It was ceded before that. So it's complicated, right? The idea of moving borders and such during the war as a result of like military violence and such is another cornerstone of Willow's character. It's all kind of tied together. So basically they introduce themselves to Tarek, and Tarek's quite fine in response. He's a bit catty, but he's not like rude to Willow specifically, especially once he knows that they are from Ciri-ish.
He did just have a very unpleasant conversation with Dragovich, so he can be forgiven for being a bit short.
Yeah, and honestly, Willow walked in and like stuttered for like 20 minutes before they managed to say something to him, and he's looking at them like, what? Not stuttered, stammered, like just struggled to speak.
Yeah.
So ultimately, we ended up shaking hands. Willow removed their mask and introduced themselves as Willow Jenkins from Dallybrook, and he introduced himself as Tarek Elham from Making, which is one of the rumored epicenters of the mourning, one of the places that they assume or consider that the mourning the explosion of magical mist might have started. Shrugs. If we could ask an eyewitness, maybe, but he's dead, so... unless... Speak with dead foreshadowing. And he mentions that he can't go home tonight because he has to stay here and keep representing Ciri. So, like, despite the fact that he is very upset and he is tired, he is visibly weary. And Willow will recall later that he's actually cold, like shaking his hand. He's also, through the gloves, Willow can tell that his hands are cold. So he is unwell at this stage, but Willow doesn't really realize this until after.
Yeah, the meaning behind that.
Yeah, so it's just kind of like Willow assumes at this stage that all of his reactions are a result of this being a very triggering event, because all of the art is based around like reflections on the wall. A lot of it is based around like basically any reflection on the wall that completely ruined so many people's lives is going to be a deeply sensitive topic. And so Willow just assumes at this stage that he is upset and cranky tonight because of that. Also, he might just be a bit of an asshole, but that doesn't make him evil. He can just be a bit like a turd.
Yeah. Does not equate evil if you're just a bit of a bitch.
Yeah. So they shake hands. They are vaguely amiable, but he agrees that he has to go back out. He says that he has to go back out. Upon leaving the bathroom, he meets with Myraldine, and again, his mood seems to immediately switch back to being grumpy bum. Myraldine pops in and is like, what the hell was that? Like, justified as Tarek may be, he did nothing to diffuse the tension of that moment. Like, he escalated it to the point where Myraldine had to step in and offer a duel for his honor, which again is interesting about Myraldine, because it's like she has a particular reputation to protect here, and that is attached to Tarek. Because they are a couple, and also because she is a high-ranking sea dragon in this neck of the woods. And this is kind of like a business event, if you think about it in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the important people are at this one event, and now it's like Myraldine's role as a captain is specifically important in this instance. So it kind of, her being like, oh, now I have to fight a duel for your honor. Like, of course I'll do it because, I mean, in brackets, I assume because she cares about him. But also because you have to save face in that instance as well. Like, you can't just let this motherfucker, like, insult your boyfriend and all of Ciri.
Yeah, and get away with it.
Yeah. But it's fascinating, too, to come back and see that she seems a bit worn thin from having to fix the fires that he's starting. Or that the fires that he's refusing to walk away from as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
the fires that he is actively throwing gasoline upon.
Yeah. Tarek Elham responds to this in such a way of like, I didn't ask you to fight my battle, so don't. Like, thanks, but no thanks. Myraldine's like, ugh. And then Willow tries to diffuse the tension by being like, oh my god, thanks Myraldine for doing that. I'm honored to meet you. And thanks Tarek for saying something. Honored, so glad that you said people like Dragovich need to be put in their place. So good. Tarek and Myraldine kind of completely overlook that.
You did your best, but it was really a no-win situation for you as a third party. You really tried your best. It was so
awkward. I tried so hard. What was awkward was that Willow said it, and then Myraldine was like, yeah, okay, you have a fan on your side. Like, there is a fan here now vouching for Tarek. And Tarek's like, huh, yes, see? People supporting me. And it was like Willow was like, no.
That wasn't my intention.
I'm not trying to. So Willow tried to balance it out by complimenting Myraldine, but then they ended up in the middle between both of them, like not accomplishing anything. So ultimately, Willow's like, I'm gonna go actually and just leave you two to fight.
There's nothing I can do about this, so...
Yeah. And as Willow walks away, Willow overhears Myraldine being like, you have one of your headaches again. Oh, well... And then, like, they keep arguing. And that's when Zeke says, and I hear this so fucking clearly in my mind, because Zeke is like, and that is the last time for a long time you will see Tarek Elham. And I want to wrangle him. Because all of us are like, what do you mean by that? What are you saying? looking directly at the title card saying "Death of the Artist" and asking Zeke, "What do you mean by that?" We should move on to Miraldine at this stage.
We've talked about her a bit.
Yeah. Mainly, I wanted to mention that she went into the auction hall. And she left the auction hall briefly and came back looking upset.
Yeah, so after the art gallery viewing, we were all filtered into the auction hall portion of the grand auction hall to begin bidding on the pieces that we had been, viewing during the gallery section of the event. And Miraldine came into the auction hall, but Tarek did not. And during the bidding, Miraldine left and returned looking unhappy.
Yeah. Thanks for specifying that. I just kind of
breezed past.
Yeah. So yeah. And
at this point, we still haven't seen Tarek anywhere. He has not come into the auction hall.
Yep. So, shit breaks out, and we'll get into that shit later. But there's an attack on the auction hall. It's undead. And when we emerge from that attack, we go back to the gallery, and we find that Tarek Elham has been, at some stage during the auction hall and the big kerfuffle with the undead, strung up on the dragon statue that he had insulted upon first entering the room. It's really gory. I'll mention that in advance. He is, block your ears if you are squeamish. Right now, and come back in like 10 seconds. I'll try and be done by then. He is impaled on his eye sockets in the teeth of the dragon and suspended there with his guts cut open. Is that 10 seconds?
More or less.
It's a horrid sight.
So it's not great. It's not a great sight, no.
And immediately upon seeing that, Miraldine screams and throws an accusation at
the sculptor,
Errol de Thorani. Yeah. Do you want to talk about Errol?
As we mentioned earlier, Errol is the sculptor of the dragon statue, which we are confronted with when we first enter the gallery. And
We're suck instead of sculpt, sorry. Suck.
Sucked at sculpting a dragon, which is honestly true, since we learned from our resident dragon hunter later on that the dragon Errol constructed was not anatomically correct.
Yeah, hate it, Damon.
Arl presented his badly drawn horse at the front of a very prestigious art gallery is essentially what happened here.
Yeah.
So, Arl is, as you can see, a Thorani. So he's part of House Thorani, which is like the big art house, one of the big two art houses in Corvair. So he has very obvious connections to the larger house that we have mentioned is chummy with the Sea Dragons. They have an alliance, the two of them, House Thorani and the Sea Dragons. So, when a Sea Dragon, namely Captain Frostroot, flings an accusation that Arl, the Thorani, was the one who murdered her boyfriend, that carries a little bit of weight considering the alliance between the two factions.
Yeah, it does. And I want to take a quick aside to talk about Ryger and Ela. I want to put them on screen. You got to look at these guys.
Look at these dudes.
Bad while looking at these dudes. All right, let's put them. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom over here. I'll chuck them in. Oh. Is that wrong? No, it's so right. Okay, so Ryger, High Prince Ryger is the sea captain of the fleet, the Sea Dragon fleet, which kind of makes him the leader of this entire place, the Regal Port and all of that. And he is chummy. That's the thing I want to mention. Earlier, when we see him and Eli talking, they are like pals. They're talking about getting together for a barbecue brunch on Sunday. They're that kind of friends. Like that. They're talking about the Eli's 800 grandkids. You know, like it's they're chummy. And as aforementioned, they have a mutual relationship that keeps them both afloat. Presumably, Ryger is protected by House Thorani and in return protects House Thorani. So having that accusation thrown, and I remember Zeke specifically described the way that like Ryger side glances Ela and Ela's not looking at him. It's like, oh no, the girls are fighting. Like immediately. Like it's funny because I don't see either of them immediately succumbing to that kind of thing. But as we go on, I'm still convinced that in the background there is political tension like we cannot believe that we just can't look at right now because we're focusing on other stuff. Also because they are very important. Thus, it's not like we can just go sit there and watch them have meetings about.
Yeah, it's not a public event. They're not dueling in the street yet, so we can't watch what's going on.
Yeah.
Yet.
But it is very fun to know that like at the start of the arc, they were like, you old dog. What do you call him? You old knife? Your old knife, I think. Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, and then Ela referred to him like, are you so much of a puppy that I can't leave you to something? Like, because Ela's an elf and lives for 800 bajillion years, and Ryder's just a dude.
Yeah, Ryder's like beard. 1.5 in elf years.
Infant.
Yep.
That is, in charge of an entire fleet of folks.
Ryder's a 5-year-old.
Yeah, it's a very prolific 5-year-old in Ela's eyes. I'm kidding. They're both grown-ass dudes, and they are very powerful. Them being at the event was a big deal. And thus, Myrildine hurling that accusation in front of them, also a big deal, or even behind their backs. Even though Errol de Thorani is relatively unimportant in the big scheme of things, like, he is just a Thorani, like, he's just blood. He's just the great-grandnephew of Ela.
Yes.
I would say he's not...
It's not necessarily significant because the houses are all, like, related. Many of the people in the houses, as I understand, are, like, all branch families of each other, so...
Yeah.
There's gonna be a lot of connections and relations, so being the great-nephew of Ilar is not, like, super significant, and then it's like, oh my god, you're Ilar's great-nephew, and like, no one else fits that bill. There's a lot. Ilar has a lot of kids, and they have a lot of kids, and it's just... There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So
that's not necessarily important for him. Except that it makes it funnier when he's like, I don't know why great uncle loves him so much about Tarek. Because we can recap too. We sent Luca to flirt with Errol to try and get intel on House Thorani. Yes. And it worked.
We did. During the night before he was accused and before any of the shit went down.
Yeah. We were like, Luca, you're hot. He's easy.
You have appeal. You have appeal. Arl's sad. You're a big, comforting beefcake. Why don't you just mosey on over there and kiss him with your eyes a bit?
Right? Could give him something to smile about. And he did. And what Errol did reveal was, I don't like Tarek Elhim at all. He's yucky. Also, Errol revealed that he used to work at an enclave. He used to live at an enclave in Karnath. I believe Zeke said in the chat that like the House Fialan enclaves in Karnath were taken over by House Thorani or something, or they're now owned by House Thorani.
Yes.
So, Errol, that's all we kind of know about Errol, is that he is a waif. He is a little bit vapid. He doesn't like, he thinks that the war opera that Tarek made was a bit grim and probably didn't need to be so gloomy, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just sheltered. He's just got that very sheltered rich boy, not brain good. He spent the rest of the evening after being insulted, like hanging around the buffet tables, just kind of moping, which is why we sent Luca over to him, help him out. Also, read his mind. Not read his mind. Sorry, that's a thing that we can actually do. Pick his mind. So ultimately, having him be accused as well was like you definitely don't like Tarek, but you're a bit useless. So it didn't feel right even from the outset. I would say that from our perspective.
Yeah,
it was like
Arl did seem like the one who committed the crime. But he was certainly lined up in such a way that you could see how someone might be led to that conclusion.
Yeah, and almost to a fault. Like, he didn't like Tarek very much, and Tarek is murdered on his statue. Of course it's Errol. And Miraldine threw, an accusation at him. So of course it's Errol. But like, if you look at it from a distance, it's like, why would you do that to yourself? And also, Errol has too high an opinion of his own artwork to like bloody it with a person he doesn't like. Like,
it's all a bit on the nose.
Yeah, which is something that will come up again later, won't it?
Yeah, which is something that is a common occurrence with the likely real killer here.
Yeah. So, that's that's what that accusation means, and this arrow. So basically, should we cut to later? Because he is placed under house arrest now, being the air quotes
prime suspect.
If not prime suspect, then definitely in danger. Because as we know from earlier in this thing, when Miraldine was slighted on behalf of her boyfriend, she challenged Dragovich to a duel. Yes. In this neck of the woods, you can just duel and kill someone if they've wronged you, you know? Mm-hmm. This is not the kind of like go through it. That's the legality.
Yeah, that's part of the legal landscape here in Regalport.
So part of me thinks that maybe Errol is also under house arrest for his own sake. Like, so you don't go out there and get stabbed. You know?
Yeah. It's a distinct possibility.
Because, I don't know. That's speculation at this stage. It just kind of clicked at the moment. Like, just to protect Errol.
You can do both.
To protect the house too, because he probably got. So I'm like, I didn't stab Tarek. I mean, I didn't like him, and I think his work is gruesome and mean, but I would never kill him.
I don't like gruesome and mean things. Why would I do it?
Yeah. Don't have the upper body strength for that.
Can't stand the sight of blood.
Yeah, exactly. So Arrow's placed under house arrest. I'm gonna put that in his thing because I think it's funny. 18th of the 5th. let's write it. Arrow insulted at art gallery by Tarek Elham. Flirted with by Luca to reveal information. Accused of murder.
He had quite the evening.
Oh my gosh.
Murder.
Oh my gosh. Miraldine. Okay, accused of murder by Miraldine when Tarek's corpse was found on his statue, and then placed under house arrest.
I bitch.
And I also find it very funny that we learn later. So we just skip through Arrow's entire narrative.
Yes, because from here we're going to go into another crime that was committed that night.
That is funnily unrelated. But so he's placed under house arrest. Uncle Elar has given him a lawyer so that Arrow doesn't say anything stupid. Because as we discover later, his testimonies were very damning. He said that he didn't remember what he was doing at the time of the murder. Which ages very funnily in retrospect. Because remember, we are all very wary of listening for like mind melty magic because we're like, oh my god, it's dragons. Oh my god, if Arrow doesn't remember. Yeah, sorry, go.
Illusion, mind reading, mind wiping, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So when Arrow says, I don't remember what I was doing at the time of the murder, we're like, what? Then maybe he got his mind wiped. Maybe somebody is trying to scapegoat via Arrow. I'm looking directly at the camera with a deadpan expression. Long story short, do you want to describe how he showed up to
to the Madani office?
Yeah,
well, sometime later Arl shows up at Brina Madani's office, and she's a detective, so the detective's office, the detective in charge of investigating the crimes committed at the Grand Auction Hall. Arl shows up in the middle of the night in a cloak banging down the detective agency's door, pretty much saying he admits to everything and he is the reason for at least the death of the staff on the night of the Grand Auction Hall crimes. And yeah, he flounders his way into the office and starts sobbing in Rena's office about just what a horrible person he is and how he is probably the cause of the morning or something, with how much guilt he carries into that room on his back.
God.
And well, spoiler alert, he was not really involved in anything as like sinister or damning as he seems to think.
As always, Errol is wrong.
Yeah.
And no one was surprised. But what he did do, the thing that he did do wrong, was that he liaised with Dragovich and Vaelia. Yes. So we can probably skip to this section now as we talk about what Errol did do wrong, other than his general life.
Yeah, that's the title of this next section, What Errol Did Do Wrong. So, as you might recall...
Can't even be guilty properly.
Yeah, God. As you might recall, between the last time we saw Tarek alive and his murder, there was another event, quote unquote, that took place during the bidding of the Nuclear Art Auction and Gallery. And that was an undead attack. So during the bidding, there was an abrupt explosion of smog, choking smog, and from that smog spilled a whole bunch of undead, which proceeded to attack the people attending the auction. During that attack, we find out later, there was a theft of the storehouse underneath the auction hall. Mm-hmm. And during that attack, multiple staff were killed, both the undead attack and an attack that ensued while the theft was occurring in the storeroom. And some artifacts were stolen during that theft, obviously, because it is a theft. Some artifacts, I keep forgetting their exact origin. Ancient Aranese, I believe. They stole some ancient artifacts from the storeroom below the auction hall, and in the process also killed some staff and unleashed a bunch of undead upon the auction hall itself. The undead were dealt with, though not without a couple casualties on their end as well. Dragovich killed some of the staff while committing the theft, and they disappeared from the auction hall before the discovery of Tarek's body. This theft, we find out, is, as far as we can tell, entirely disconnected from Tarek and the reasons behind his murder. This was a different plan, a different group of people with different end goals. Dragovich doesn't even know who Tarek is.
He got into an argument with him, called him a poet, but like I feel like he knew him as like the poet, probably the Syrian poet.
Yeah.
You know? Because then when we were like, are you involved in the death of Tarek? He's like, who? And he means it. He's genuinely like, what? Someone died?
Yeah.
Read the papers sometimes, Stanislav.
He's on the run. He's lying.
Read the paper.
He's lying in his bedpan with the paper, not reading it.
Oh my God. It's so rude. His litter box. Okay, carry on. All right.
Yeah. So they disappeared, and they were not involved with the murder, but they were involved with the murder of the staff. Which is, of equal importance to us, as well as the theft and why they stole these ancient artifacts to begin with. So we are also essentially roped into investigating this, because at the top of the mystery, we're not sure where the connections lie or don't between these two incidents, between the undead attack and the death of Tarek, because there was still quite the possibility that they were two linked events at the time. So part of the investigation was determining why the undead attack happened and where its roots lie. And it turns out its roots lie in a separate cult from the Snapdragons, whose spoilers are probably involved with Tarek's murder to some degree. This is a different cult No association with the Snapdragons as far as we know at this point, called the Emerald Claw, the Order of the Emerald Claw. And these two are operatives of the Order of the Emerald Claw who were sent to Regalport to procure these ancient artifacts in an effort to do some Karnathi end of the world kind of ritual involving their Queen of the Undead, Queen of the Dead, Lady Ilmarrow. And this is, as far as we know, at this point, entirely disconnected from Tarek's death and the Snapdragons. So, in the middle of all this other stuff going on, we find ourselves hunting down these two, who are part of the Order of the Emerald Claw, to try and take them into custody before they do more shit and get away with the artifacts to do whatever they want to do with these artifacts. And we half succeed. Like 50-40%.
We capture one of them, and halfway through interrogation, he
cyanide pills himself, essentially, is the best way to shorthand it. He activates a magical kill switch, so he can't be captured or interrogated or used in any other capacity.
If cyanide poison, cyaniding yourself made you turn into an undead and attack people rather than just letting you die.
Yeah, so it's like a cyanide kamikaze kind of situation. He does turn into an undead as a result of this kill switch and attacks the interrogators and the guards at the time, which were Anne and Brina. So that was fun, but that also cut off our ability to question him any further than we did. We did get a bit of information out of him, including a whole spiel about Lady Ilmarrow and their plans, which, has value. Meanwhile, Vaelia had gotten away, and we ended up pursuing her, and we did our darndest. We did find her, and we did fight with her, but we nearly died, and she got away as a result, teleporting back to her home island of Faralnan with the artifacts. So we lost the artifacts, we lost Vaelia, and we lost Stanislav in custody.
Rest in peace. Or pieces, or part of, whatever.
Yeah. So
rib, rest in bucket. We laugh about it, but his death was very sad, actually. It was like, he's a dickhead, he's a warmonger, he's part of a cult, he's evil. He's very, very evil, but at the same time, there is like a misery, there is like a horrid kind of about how quickly he gave his life away. And the way he's described, he's not young, like 20s young, but he's not old. Like, he's probably like in his 30s. And he went, okay, for Lady Ilmarrow, for Vaelia's swift escape, I'm going to die right now and make sure that my death is as destructive as fucking possible for everyone in the room.
You can just really see the through lines of how he was manipulated into this position and just understanding his base humanity and how that was corrupted to this point, to becoming nothing but a sacrificial lamb to the Emerald Claw. It's a miserable way to see a life turn out and end. Yeah.
So it's all like, haha, rest in puddle, but also like, haha, yikes! There is a lot of,
There's a duality there.
Yeah. It's very interesting to see, especially because there were parallels being drawn, in my mind anyway, about him and Luca, about like what it means to consign yourself fully to devoting yourself to a cause.
Yeah, and also the Order of the Emerald Claw is based in Karnath, and Luca is also from Karnath, which is where another parallel can be drawn between Dragovich and Luca. So they are both originally Karnathi.
Yeah, and huge, but let's not get it twisted that he is still a gigantic prick, and I'm not really crying at his funeral, but I am sad for the outcome of his life.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a duality there. We like go, haha, bitch, but also it's like,
bitch, short prey hands, yikes, fuck off. The greatest thing we can do for Dragovich is make sure that there are no more Dragoviches.
Yes.
Which is, everything with the Emerald Claw was kind of like, felt like the beginning of a thread for a next adventure, which is we are eventually going to find Vaelia and hear about Lady Ilmeri's return. Like, that's kind of the
Yes, I have a feeling this is not the last time we are going to be hearing about the Emerald Claw's machinations. So the fact that Vaelia got away with the artifacts is nothing but it's like seeing Edmund Beckett at the Gallery of Shadows in episode 10. This will come back to haunt us.
This will be relevant later. Oh, such good writing. Everyone shout out to Zeke. Everyone just pat Zeke on the head repeatedly right now, and we'll go back to this. Basically, what we learned from this is, despite all of our questions, and I will say, we highly suspected early that these guys were involved. One of the things that the Order of the Emerald Claw is known for is they're like a militant, military, radical extremist group. Yeah. And like one of the things that they were known for is potentially being responsible for the assassination of Princess Mishan, who is the Syrian princess that, air quotes, started the war. I wouldn't say started the war, but was there at the start of the war. Yeah, I believe.
I don't remember.
I think so. No. But considering that context of like the Order of the Emerald Claw might have been responsible for assassinating the Princess of Syria, kind of felt like it was leading us to consider that they might also be involved in the assassination of Tarek Elam, because especially since his play was all about like, you know, Syrian defiance and all of that. So it was actually looking quite at the beginning that they might have been involved, if not like completely responsible, then in part,
at least helping facilitate it.
Yeah. But what it looks like now, to me anyway, is that somebody else found out about their plans and then latched plans on top of it.
Yeah. You know? We don't know for sure yet, but it's possible.
Or the other option too is like, no one knew. It was just a very good event to do some mayhem. To
we were also planning to try and do mayhem that night. Yeah. We just didn't get a chance because two other people shooted their shots.
Showed up. Yeah. Shooted, you're zooted. Yeah. No, for sure. I would love if there's like a spin-off story about like the secret fourth scheme that evening, which was just like something low-key, like stealing Ocean's 11, stealing food from the kitchen or something, you know, like a chef drama in the background.
Steals all the hors d'oeuvres.
Maybe it was the only successful heist of the evening.
Maybe.
We just don't know it. Yeah. They got away with it.
It's like, thank God the undead attack and the murder. No one's gonna notice the missing olives.
There's someone in Regalport making the biggest bowl of spaghetti you've ever seen. And it's like, haha, they'll never know I stole the ingredients from the auction hall.
Scot-free, baby!
Johnson, where did you get all those olives? I'll never tell. Anyway, so moral of the story is we were provided with a red herring. Herring?
Yeah, so to speak.
It's a herring, right?
The herring.
The heron. Okay.
The herring, yes.
We were provided with a humongous cult-shaped red herring, and we ate it. And it's gone now.
Yes. Gone, it's solved.
They were not involved in the death of Tarek Elham. Oh, though they did capitalize off some of the rivalry stuff by dressing the undead as dire sharks. Dire sharks are another pirate group that are rivals of the sea dragons. Miraldine immediately was like, this is not dire sharks. Like, obviously. This is someone trying to stoke shit between the dire sharks and the sea dragons. But, like, they're undead. They are probably Blood of Vol related. They're probably Carnathi, like, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But that's the other reason why it was kind of like, for a moment we were like, could it be Emerald Claw? Because they are stirring shit and they are kind of like breaking down the foundations of the place. But it turns out that's kind of just a part of their big plan to reap chaos.
Yeah, and basically we learned later that it was like, we don't really care if dressing our undead in dire sharks clothing causes a stir or not in the sea dragons. Like, if it does or it doesn't, it's really inconsequential to us in our larger plans.
Yeah. They can always benefit from, as with all like kind of terror groups, you can always benefit from people being a bit panicky and stupid about it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean stupid in a bad way. I mean like human about it. Stupid in the human way.
Yeah.
Yeah, like growing doubt and benefiting from that doubt.
Yeah, people won't always be capable of using their full sense when they're afraid, and that's what like organizations like this will bank on to get their foot in the door of succeeding at whatever their twisted goals might be.
Yeah, and turning like allegiance from Ryger away to this impending threat of Lady Ilmar's. Like it's you can see the method to their air quotes madness, and it sucks. But nevertheless, they are now ruled out as suspects for Tarek Elham's murder, at least.
Yes.
Though the inevitable stabbing of Luca Conson is high on the list.
It'll come back. But the way this links to Arl is, Arl was the one who helped them get in the good graces, I suppose. No, I wouldn't really call it good graces, but get in contact with the auction hall staff, which they then utilized to facilitate the undead attack and the theft to a degree. So they tricked and blackmailed the auction hall staff to facilitate that attack. And that was thanks to Aro introducing them, essentially. So, and also Aro was buying weapons off them, though not to use for combat purposes. Instead, Aro was using them for his anatomically incorrect dragon sculpture.
Yeah.
So, Aro did everything wrong, but not in the way he decided to admit to the detective.
One of my favorite things that he admitted was like, I must have spoken poorly of Tarek Elham while we were talking, and they must have caught wind of my discontent and then murdered Tarek Elham. And it's like, your opinion is not that important.
Yeah, as if you mattered enough to them that they decided to go out of their way to dramatically kill the playwright just because you're like, that Tarek Elham, can't stand him.
Yeah, we should murder him now, right? Right, Ilya? Yeah, okay. And then they no, that's not how it turned out. But if you're self-obsessed, that is how you might think it would turn out.
Yes.
In contact with the staff of the auction hall. He was a friend of Tassie, which I will mention.
Yes, one of the main things.
Himself, yeah.
One of the main things that we learn during the memorial section of this investigation is that Arrow was a friend of Tassie, who is a friend of En's as well. And felt extremely guilty because she was one of the casualties in the undead attack. So her death is weighing on his conscience and is one of the things that drives him to come to the Madani office and confess everything.
Yeah. Confess, I'm going to put in quotes, everything to Brina. I will say too, him saying that he did not remember where he was at the time of Tarek's murder
was a lie.
It was just a lie. It wasn't proof of any mind meddling. He was just lying, and badly. Which is funny though, because that little tidbit ended up making us research memory-based magic.
Yes.
Which is relevant, but not to this.
Yeah, it didn't happen to Arl, it happened somewhere else. Then we still don't know about that exact utilization of mind-wiping magic, but it did occur, and it was Arl lying that put us on the scent of the idea that that kind of magic has possibly been used in this case. So that's funny how that turned out.
Yeah, we failed successfully to find something. And so we've ruled out the Order of the Emerald Claw, which brings us back to Miraldine. So, Miraldine, at some point, when is it that we discover that she is planning a resurrection?
That is, I think, the day that N starts to have contact with Brina, which is the day after the murder, I think. Because it was either the day after the murder or the next day. Or, no, day after the murder, it was 2 days after the murder then. Yeah. I forget. The timetable doesn't necessarily matter. It was too soon after the murder that then got in contact with the detective Brina and pretty much offered their services to Brina as a fellow investigator. And aced the interview, so to speak. So got on board, and it was through discussing the case with Detective Brina that N learned that Miraldine is planning to attempt a resurrection to bring Tarek back from his untimely demise.
Yeah, which is a lot. Oh boy, it's a lot. So basically, resurrection is conceptualized in this universe as imagine seance meets brain surgery. And it is deeply complex. It is very, very hard to do. It requires a team, and it's incredibly expensive. But Myraldine is, as we know, she is a sea dragon captain. She is like an up-and-comer. She's business savvy, business-minded. She's a girl boss. She's girl bossy. She's got a ship. She won the ship in a wager, I believe. Yeah?
A contest.
A contest. I keep saying wager instead of contest.
It's a contest.
Yeah, I can't remember. Somewhere along the line, we keep getting that mixed up, but it was a contest that she won the ship in. So she stays winning, except for when she loses, which she apparently does not do. So she is now going to
She's decided, no, so she's going to resurrect her boyfriend.
Yeah. That's massive. So this is like a big revelation to discover about her, that yes, her boyfriend's dead for now, and she is keeping him on ice at the hospital. Which is basically like magical cryo. He is Sleeping Beauty at the moment, except Sleeping Beauty is dead. Like, he's dead.
He's just
for now.
Sleeps in some bloods.
However, she is also sending herself into debt to do it.
Yes, she's not accepting any financial aid from any other people.
Mm-hmm.
So she is using only her own assets and bank loans, essentially, to fund this endeavor.
Yeah. In canon, we actually see her reject financial aid or offering of financial aid from a few people. One of them is Lydia Ditharani, who is the main actress in Tarek's play.
Yep, she's the prima donna of the Folly.
Yep, and presumably has a lot of money to spare, and is kind of like taken aback, if not confused, as to why Myraldine would not accept her money. We'll go into the reasons why later, because there were speculated reasons, and then there were Myraldine's own reasons that she talked about. But I think Rom should have a chance to talk about, speaking of, the fact that Myraldine is Tarek's next of kin, and thus kind of controls where
his assets go, so to speak.
Yeah.
So the play.
I think talk about Edmund. I'm gonna add his shitty little face to our thing.
All evidence suggests that Edmund was also offering Captain Frostroot aid for this whole resurrection plan. And it's also quite likely that what he was asking for in exchange was Tarek's play, the rights to show Tarek's play in Sharn, Edmund's hometown, so to speak. Because earlier Edmund had sent correspondence to Tarek asking, essentially, for the rights to show Tarek's play in Sharn, and Tarek refused Edmund of the rights to show his play, or take his play to Sharn, or anything like that. So Edmund was refused. So Edmund swings back on around after Tarek dies, and in some way, shape, or form has approached Myraldine to, I can only assume, and this hasn't been spelled out, but like I said, all evidence suggests that he will help in the resurrection effort in exchange for the play. That's the only thing I can imagine with the evidence we have as to why we saw at a certain point after the murder Edmund and Myraldine conversing.
Yeah. And of course, there is the idea that even if he isn't directly like, yes, I'll give you some assistance in exchange for blah, 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 there is also the possibility that it's just like a yes, I'll give you this, no strings attached. And then you find later that there are strings attached.
Yeah, and you bite into something and it's stringy, and you're like, why is this stringy? It didn't look stringy on the outside. It's stuck in your teeth now, and yeah. So that's the Edmund Beckett experience, and that's why.
I guess it is, yeah.
That's why we'll just caramelize him and dump him.
What?
Dump him down the sink instead of bite him. Anyway.
I died. Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, that sounds normal and fine.
So yeah, there is also the avenue, and also one reason I can fathom that Meraldine doesn't want to accept aid from anyone is because even if out the gate the aid is offered without strings attached, you're bringing a guy back from the dead. There is a lot of weight in that act. So it's not necessarily out of the question that either you might feel some degree of indebted to the people who made that happen, or they might impress that feeling upon you. You know?
Yeah.
They will, well, I saved your life. I literally brought you back from the dead. Don't you think you owe me? You know?
Yeah, I know.
And like, that's the angle you can start to pull after the fact.
Yeah.
After the resurrection is successfully executed. The peculiar choice of words. So that's another reason I can see why Meraldine would want to avoid getting other people involved in funding the resurrection. Especially someone like Edmund, who we find out later on. Meraldine is not a huge fan of Edmund either. Does not like him with the way she speaks of him. So you can see why. And Lydia was more or less a amicable acquaintance of Meraldine's, as far as I could tell, before this whole thing happened. Like, they weren't enemies, I don't think. I probably wouldn't go far as to say they were friends, but they were business partners. And
Who's this?
Lydia and Meraldine.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we also see her reject aid from Lydia. So it's not just like, I don't like Edmund, so I'm not going to accept help funding from him. It's from everyone. Because anyone could pull that string.
Yeah.
It's like when families come out of the woodwork when a will is suddenly on the table.
Yeah.
You want shit.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Yeah. I'm filling in Edmund Beckett's section now.
Oh, nice.
So,
Let me find him. There he is. There's the motherfucker himself. What a tool.
Yeah. One of the other things too is when he sent, so at the time that he sent Tarek the letter, he also had a fan letter drafted for Lydia. So he'd received rejection from Tarek, and then his next letter was written to Lydia. And the letter was like, "Oh my god, I love your work in The Folly. Like, you were so good in that show. I love you, Beyonce."
Buttering her up.
How we interpreted that at the time was like he failed one avenue, so he's beginning to butter up the next avenue, which is, which makes it seem really sus that Tarek dies and then the rights to Tarek's play end up kind of up in the air, or rather in Meraldine's hands. And then suddenly this guy is walking at her door being like, "Oh, can I help with the resurrection? Suddenly I have so much money and I am of course interested in the play. What a pity that your boyfriend passed away so that he could not see it. I don't know, come to Sean maybe." But because that is secret information. That's only information that we found out because we broke into Edmund's room.
Hotel room earlier in the month. So it was not something we could prove to anyone at the time.
Funnily though, we also know that Lydia, while she did speak to Edmund Beckett, she was not like impressed upon by him in any way.
No,
like it was.
We spoke to Lydia later, and she's like, "Who? Oh, that guy. Yeah, I don't know. He just has a face like that, you know."
Just an unpleasant kind of. I want her to say fuck so bad. She's a very sweet, like she's just very sweet.
Let her say fuck once, like a PG-13 movie.
Yeah, somewhere during The Folly. So
I think
Beckett...
the fuck not, father.
Baron Eli's like, "That was not in the script. Are you mad at me?"
Eli's sliding the script out from under the blankets because he's like a bedridden king in the play. Checks the script.
Lydia's glaring at him like, "This is personal." Relish. Let's give some more background on Edmund Beckett, huh?
Yeah, so Edmund Beckett is a former Braylist Knight. He also worked for the King's Dark Lanterns, which is like a Brayland-oriented espionage group. They're spies for Brayland and Brayland only, unlike Fjarland spies who served all the nations because houses don't adhere to the will of one nation, technically.
They're neutral. Winks.
They're neutral in war and life, you know.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Well, since the war has ended, or since he retired, whichever came first, he has become a philanthropist and art dealer, and he is known for sponsoring talent to House Fjarlin. He's also known for attending snuff theaters and drinking tears. That is real tears from real people who have lost their real husbands recently. And by recently, I mean like 5 minutes ago.
Another content warning spoiler.
Yeah. That we're talking about snuff theater. So, much like if you are familiar with the term snuff film, it is like that, but live action on stage.
Call it live action, Rome. You're not wrong. Keep talking.
So he was in attendance of one of these snuff theaters, as was witnessed by N, our warlock, during which he drank the literal tears of one of the victims. So he is all around pretty much set himself up through his association with the Snapdragon cult as probably a pretty shit person. And he's so far not done anything to dissuade that interpretation, including wearing the symbol of the Snapdragons at the auction house itself, the auction event. So he wore the symbol of his involvement with that snuff theater 5 years later at the auction hall, which is like proof that he has not changed his ways in those 5 years, and he is not like even ashamed of his association to any degree. So it was not like, well, yes, N saw him at the Snuff Theater 5 years ago, but since then he's had, kind of revelation in his twilight years, and he regrets his... No, absolutely not. So here he is, and he's been my primary Kill Bill siren for the last many, many hours and days in my life.
Let's recap too. A more Edmund Beckett-centric approach. Our whole idea for going to the auction was Edmund Beckett.
Yeah.
Because we were like, he's sus. He's our only lead on this cult. He's from Shan. And if we can read his mind or get any intel whatsoever, we might have a better idea of what to do about this cult that N wants to hunt.
Yes.
Or rather, this cult that is hunting N. Because this is going to be a problem regardless.
Yeah, we're not entirely sure what the cult's goal is. If when they find N, that's a when now, not an if. As recently as last episode, that has become a when.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that some other time. But yes, our
Later.
primary focus when we first entered the auction was to follow this fucker and read his mind. That was N's like, we had talked through a lot of options. One was just assassinating him outright, and we kind of talked N down from that approach. Because that's what N wanted to do initially, because this fucker's wicked and vile. Let's just...
Yeah, Willow's approach was like, okay, we can't assassinate him. He's our only lead.
So, in saying all that, we decided we weren't going into this art auction to assassinate Edmund. At the bare minimum, what N wanted to do was read his mind, ideally deeper than just surface thoughts. But, N was at that point at peace, like, we'll get as much information as we can out of this event. And that became their main goal. Unfortunately, when N did try to read Edmund's thoughts, when they had an opportune moment to like skim his surface thoughts and maybe try and just get an idea of the deeper layers there, they were blocked. Some sort of magical block was there that made it impossible for them to actually connect their magic to Edmund. It was Zeke described it as target invalid, which he keeps bringing up that phrasing, which makes me think there's a certain significance to it. Not just like blocked, invalid. So maybe they're equivalent, but to me, it feels like there's some evidence there of something else going on. But we don't know what that is at this point. All we know is that N could not read Edmund's mind, which was like their baseline. If I can do nothing else tonight, I will read his mind, and they could not do it. So that was disappointing.
Yeah. Can I also bring up too? A lot of our plans about assassinating Edmund were made before we knew that he was a former Secret Service agent, you know?
Mhm.
I think I recall that our plans about like assassinating him and all that, or kidnapping him even, or even having a moment with him, we knew that he was a knight, yeah?
Yeah, that was one of the first things N learned alongside his name months ago.
But I do believe it was Damon that mentioned that he was part of the Dark Lanterns.
Yes.
Which is different than just being a sword slinger. Like, he's a spy as well.
Yeah, which makes obviously approaching him with some maybe under the table intentions much more dangerous when you're dealing with a spy of that caliber.
Yeah, like it's his main job.
Yeah, and so like whatever you're planning, he's probably seeing through it. Yeah,
exactly.
And as it turns out, maybe more than we think. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're right. Honestly, all of your Edmund Beckett related frenzy, so valid. But no, one of the things that we did too to basically guard ourselves from this. So one of the reasons Willow brought Damon on, or suggested that Damon should be brought on, and then the team agreed, was he is very powerful. Out of everyone, Damon is distinctly strong. One of the first things we learnt about Damon Ir Adantego was that he doesn't like take damage in a normal way. That is to say, he's hard to hit too. And we noted that he doesn't bleed right. That is one of like the main things we noted about Damon.
He's fast and he's durable. I don't know what that even
means. Yeah, he's sturdy. So he's also not like privy to all of the inner workings of the group. So one of the pieces of logic was that if anyone among us can talk to Edmund Beckett and have a reason to that isn't weird or immediately dangerous, the person that is safest to do that is Damon. So one of the main goals we had that night too. Oh, and additionally, Damon has his pendant, which allows him to detect magic, and he's also very smart and just generally good at what he does. He's a monster hunter. So of course we sent him to the monster in the room.
Yeah.
So part of that big plan was to make it so that Damon is the first point of contact with Edmund Beckett. Because if things go wrong, it won't be as wrong as, for example, if we sent Luca, who we've established is a prime prime target for the Snapdragons, which has aged so badly, but we'll get back to that later.
Talk about that later.
Being that the Snapdragons prey on people who are like lonely, vulnerable, former war veterans, have a lot of like trauma to feed on. And N has had like nightmares about Luca being killed by Edmund Beckett, which Luca responded to with like, yeah, okay, he can try, I guess. I'll give him one shot. And then on the flip side, all of us are very close to N. And if N is discovered by Edmund Beckett, we don't know what that's going to entail. N could be killed immediately. N could be kidnapped again. N is carrying cargo of the Snapdragons in their eye socket.
Yeah.
You know, that is, N might be, we don't know the nature of the eyeball, but it's could be property of the Snapdragons and they could want it back.
They might want it back.
Don't know.
I don't know what happened to the other eyes that were planted that night. I mean, I know the bodies they were in ended up being defunct. I don't know if the eyes were then extracted from those bodies afterwards. I was busy being a victim.
Sorry, I was busy being a victim. Yeah, I'm gonna use that one just in general. No, and then one of the other important things too, N burnt down the theater. Like, speaking of property damage, N left. Did you kill people? Like, whoever was inside that theater probably dead?
People definitely burned and died alongside the building, yes.
Yes, so in terms of public enemy for the Snapdragons, N, in their successful attempt to stay alive, made themselves such an enemy of the Snapdragons because they not only didn't get killed by them and run away with their product, I don't know what you'd call the eyeball, but also they burnt down the theater with presumably a bunch of their cultists in it. So, first of all, congratulations, N. That's the coolest shit you've ever done. No offense. Like, one day you'll be able to applaud yourself for it when the trauma fades off, maybe. But
I hope so.
But also, that is why, from the outset, I know at least from Willow's perspective, the goal was always to keep the degrees of separation away from N. because not only because of how it would like affect N, because we saw how it affected N the first time. N basically tapped out and became Kai for a week. That's kind of incorrect to say, but you know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at?
It's not...
The related trauma.
Yeah, it's not totally incorrect. And as routinely dissociated in some way or another when thinking about the Snapdragons, so...
Yeah, so Willow's always coming from the approach of like, we need to be able to function in these circumstances, so we need to prepare for the fact that this is emotionally distressing. Like, we're not going to get through this by avoiding the idea that we are going to be distressed by it, you know? Mm-hmm. So part of that is like, hey, and you can't just go and talk to Edmund and say like, and pretend and act, even if you're the best like liar among us. Just because you're the best at doing it doesn't mean that it's going to be plausible, because if you stand in front of Edmund Beckett and you read his mind, you are also going to be reading his mind. That's not just you getting intel, that's you getting confronted and re-traumatized. That's like a thing that Willow's been very adamant about from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Like, don't think yourself invincible when it comes to that kind of thing. You also have to be exposed to the truth that you're digging for, you know? And that will affect you worse than any of us because you have prior trauma. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
This is part of the Willow, when I say air quotes, like facilitation stuff in the background, Willow scheming in the background, this is a lot of it. Like the mindfulness about that kind of like preparing for fallout in all of its forms.
Yeah.
So, long story short, that is a big reason why we decided to latch onto Damon. Because first of all, he was an entrance to the actual place without us having to reason why we were going. Because we were just like, oh, we're his entourage. But also that Damon has specific powers that keep eyes away from, for example, N. And because we know about N's stuff, life, derogatory.
I agree.
And shit. And Damon doesn't, there's another degree of like protection for N as well. And all of us, because if they find out that we're all privy to them, then we're all on the chopping block. Which is kind of where we are now in canon, but that's skipping ahead. Moral of the story is we told Damon, go speak to Edmund, and Damon was like, okay, and did. And kind of tried to pick his brain. They low-key antagonized each other. And then Damon noticed then that he couldn't really get a good read on Edmund. I think his takeaway when we gathered together was there's something fucked up about that guy.
That was pretty much word for word what Damon told me. But thanks.
Yeah.
I knew that already.
No, but like magically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fact that that's coming from Damon, who had no prior experience with Edmund's extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
You know, is significant because Damon seems like the kind of guy who's also not easily daunted by things, you know? So when Damon is like particularly, hesitant about dealings with monsters or people, then you should kind of pay attention, I feel.
Yeah, very much. If the guy that doesn't get scared by anything seems scared, you get more scared. That's the feeling with Damon. And he came away from the Edmund conversation like, ugh, about him because he couldn't pin what was wrong with him. But there was something wrong with him. Damon was the one that saw the pin as well on Edmund's collar. So he's the one who informed us about the pin, which N then recognized from their own memories of the theater.
Yeah. So that's the symbol of the Snapdragon cult. And Edmund was wearing it. Yep.
And Damon also offered up the idea that maybe the reason why Edmund's mind was hard to read was just because he is a super spy. Like, he's trained to not be read, because obviously if you're a super spy, you can't just let your mind be read willy-nilly. You carry the king's secrets. So he might have, he might have some magic on him. He might have a trinket that's helping protect his mind. But thus far, he is the only person, or he might not have a brain, as we keep joking about. He might be something completely different. He might be a projection.
Yep.
Has anyone put their hand through his face?
I wish, let me try.
We don't know.
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, like he might not even. I don't know. There are so many weird, wacky ways that this could be a thing, but we just don't know. All we know is that Damon's kind of spooked by him. I know he'd hate me saying that, but
it's true. Oh, well. Don't make it true if you don't want it said.
Oh my god. And what else about Edmund? Yeah, he's bad. Just bad guy.
Bad news
and
bears.
Fesses every time he's on screen. And he... Oh, and sorry, the important other thing about Edmund, he left. He's... Okay, so there was a travel ban placed after the events of the auction went to shit after Tarek died. Travel ban was placed. He stayed for the duration of the travel ban. He was seen speaking with Miraldine about, like, presumably his plans to help donate money to Tarek's resurrection. And then he's now gone. And I feel like I just got the shits before stream again because I was like, he has got such an airtight alibi. This is something that was brought up about him at the actual auction as well. His alibi is airtight. He cannot have the Tarek Elham murder pinned on him at the moment. Yeah. Like,
even according to Brina, and we trust Brina's discerning eye.
Yeah, she would know. She's a detective. So, like, Edmund Beckett being out of town now before we've kind of solved the mystery feels so annoying. Like, I'm like, oh, you failed. You're not going to take any... Like, there is no chance at the moment for him to take immediate consequence for his actions. But he is on the horizon. Or we could lure him back. We're not sure yet. The fact that we're talking about all this, but we still don't really know how it's going to turn out is like,
who knows? You see, because what Edmund has left in his wake is his butler.
Yeah, let's talk about the butler.
Alonzo Reedfoot. Edmund's butler of 10 years, maybe longer.
You started scoping him out much earlier than we did.
Yes.
Didn't ya?
Alonzo was actually the reason I knew about the Grand Auction Hall event at all, because Edmund came and left Regalport once before to attend the debut of The Folly, and then he left. But he also left Alonzo in Regalport, and spotted Alonzo while investigating Edmund, and learned through him that Edmund would be returning to Regalport to attend the auction, so Anne planned their whole investigation of Edmund around his return surrounding the auction. At that time, Anne didn't really have too much contact with Alonzo. Like, in terms of seeing him, they did not have direct contact at all. But Anne did observe him for a little bit. Didn't pick up too much on that front, other than he was in the good graces of the staff at the ritzy hotel that Edmund was going to be staying at. That's mostly because they paid that hotel a lot of money. So, of course, the staff was going to be nice. That's not a good quantifier of what kind of person Alonzo is, because every other interaction we've watched with Alonzo has had, if not an overcurrent, an undercurrent of unpleasantness to it. So, he's an unpleasant little man.
He is canonly described as a cruel little man.
Yes. Yeah, actually. So me, Anne, and Willow went up to Edmund's room and broke in. Broke in is a bit overly dramatic. We did have all the tools to enter there, quote unquote, legitimately. We were just masquerading as staff and linen at the time. So
wow.
So we got into the room, technically above board, under board. But the point is, Anne and Willow were up investigating Edmund's room. Luca was down in the not cafeteria, like the restaurant of the Crown, watching Edmund Beckett have breakfast to ensure he did not leave early and start returning to the room before Anne and Willow were done investigating the hotel room. And in that time, Luca, to his credit, he tried to use detect magic to investigate what Edmund and Alonzo might have had on them in terms of magic items. Unfortunately, he rolled a nat 1, Luca. So he was immediately caught doing this magic by the restaurant staff. And in causing a hubbub through that discovery, Edmund and Alonzo took note of Luca's presence. Most notably, Alonzo spent a long time looking directly at Luca. So, despite Luca being in some semblance of a disguise, he is the least disguisable out of the three of us. So it's really not out of the question that Alonso took note of Luca's appearance, and then was later able to figure out it was the same man somewhere down the line. And I have reason to believe that's not just because Alonso is perceptive little bitch, but because of something else going on with him that we have yet to fully unearth.
Yeah.
Either way, he saw Luca.
He did. We did think for some time that maybe Alonso might have been just attached to Edmund, but maybe not necessarily evil. As aforementioned, we have since discovered that he is evil on his own accord.
Yes.
He's a little bastard. But one of the things that stood out to me then too, what was it? Refresh my memory. It was mainly him that saw Luca, yeah? I think
it was noted Edmund and him both did look at Luca, but Alonso was the one who lingered his attention on Luca.
Yeah. Which is scary because he returns to speak to Luca later, but we'll get to that chronologically.
Yeah.
One of the other things too is, just as an aside, the fact that Luca distinctly had a detect magic spell go awry was part of why we invited Damon. Because Damon has inherent detect magic in his necklace that he doesn't need to cast.
He just has to be within a certain proximity.
Yeah, so the point was Luca was probably trying to do what we would end up doing at the auction, which was get a gist of what's up with them. But because that failed and Willow basically was like, stealth's not your thing. You don't need to be stealthy. Why don't you just be upfront? Why don't you just be Luca Constant out loud? Stop trying to, play espionage. You're not very good at it, no offense.
Yeah. Leave it to the saboteur and the literal spy to do the espionage stuff.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It wasn't even espionage. It's like undercover. Like you are much better suited to being a forward-facing Luca Constant rather than pretending to be anyone else.
Yeah, so, then you get kidnapped.
Yeah, well, those are the prices you pay, I guess.
Those are the consequences sometimes about being very accessible.
Yeah, but it's very interesting to see, one of the character beats I'd probably note is how Luca went from disguising himself and kind of failing the first time he spoke to Alonso to, the second time he spoke to Alonso as Luca was very, love that. But we'll get to that because we have to talk about the auction.
The next time we see Alonso he is with Edmund at the art auction and gallery. We see him flitting about here and there. He's not attached to Edmund's hip. You can see him doing his own things, though there is plenty of evidence that it is for Edmund's interest, but it's not like he is tagging along behind Edmund everywhere Edmund goes. One of the things that, and particularly notes Alonso doing, is offering a card to an artist named Jaylee. And Edmund had been earlier observed taking note of her piece as well, but it was Alonso who actually extended the business card to Jaylee. But other times Alonso seemed to be wandering around, sometimes with Edmund, sometimes not. So that was the second time we saw Alonso, and the most notable thing about that encounter is, once again, Damon did a little drive-by detect magic on Alonso Reedfoot and found the guy just covered in transmutation magic, which, an unusual degree of transmutation magic, way more than the guy has any business wearing, pretty much. Which has spurred many a theory that Alonso is not even a halfling. But we'll get into that probably soon. Whether I like it or not.
Yeah, very much. So that's the main piece that we were given at the auction hall. And we tried. We have been trying for ages to get a look at what's up with Alonso, because we all suspect that if Edmund's doing any shady shit, you're gonna involve your butler. Your butler's probably your main shit kicker in this circumstance.
Yeah.
So the fact that we couldn't really get a grip on anything about Alonso kind of pervades until the point that he visits us later. He
visits Warfred. That's
he visits. Oh yeah, I see. Yeah, that's a good point. one of the first times that we meet Alonso again afterwards is him approaching us, which is stressful. But we will talk about that after. So Alonso, evil.
Yeah. Honestly, before the conversation with Warfred, and was still a bit on the fence about Alonso's involvement, because it wasn't out of the question that Alonso was involved in, like, Edmund's general dealings, but not his Snapdragon dealings. And does want to be careful about making that discernment and not just everyone you're associated with is obviously also involved with this cult, so I'll just scorch the earth of everyone you have associations with. And doesn't want to do that, and was like, yes, this is Edmund's butler, but Edmund has done a lot of things in his life, the Sur and the Dark Lanterns, so there's a distinct possibility that Alonso is not connected to that. However...
Let's talk about Warfred.
Let's talk about Warfred Bartosz.
I don't even know where to say, what to start here. Warfred. May I?
Yes, you go right ahead, my friend.
Oh, this is going to take a while. So, before we got into this whole thing, when we broke into Edmund's room, we found a business card to the Gilded Brush. The Gilded Brush is an art studio in Regalport, and it's... When I went there, I didn't see anything sus about it. Basically, I was walking in there with nary a lead, basically going, is there red art in here? Has anyone killed Tarek Elham? Sorry, has anyone killed Kay Kelson? This was Kelson time.
Yes.
Any of you guys seeming like you've murdered a guy at a flop house recently? No? Okay, but what I did notice when I went there was that Tarek Elham's name was on the ledger as having been done, a portrait was done for him here, which is sus, but I wouldn't have known how sus until later. Skip forward to the auction hall, and we all see Tarek speaking to Warfred. Warfred Bartosz, who is a dwarven guy who's dressed fancy, and they're kind of talking about how Warfred's art is confronting and upsetting, because his art is like the death of Ciri kind of visualized as a suffering face in the center of these like ignorant sleeping faces from the other nations, and it's like this politically charged mask drawing. I'll rag on it in canon, don't worry about it. So that's kind of our first point of contact. Willow, we three decided to hit up 3 different red artworks that evening, which were like the ones that we suspected might have something to do with the Kelson murder. Again, such a reach. Luca went to one and he said that the artist was fine. En went to the other one and became besties with Jaylee. That's a vast overstatement, but you know what I mean.
Oversimplification, but
for the sake of swiftness.
Talk about Jaylee some other time.
And we can add her on to the end as a bit of self-care. So, Wolfie. Willow decided to talk to Warfred. As we mentioned before, Willow's from Ciri-ish. So that was kind of the talk of their conversation. Willow is also dressed at the time as a Cirin Warforged Gil. And one of the first things that Warfred talks about, other than like being kind of intrigued by them, is he recognizes immediately that Willow's wearing a mask. Which is weird, because a lot of other people are not as, like, observant. They don't notice that Willow is actually not a Warforged. So that's odd. He also mentions that I find out later that he's part of the Aurum, which is like a rich boys club. Thank you, Damon. Damon told us that. What else we find about him at the time? He's based in Regalport. He's originally from the Mraw Holds. Now, this kind of pings specifically because we know from our own research that En's eye might be something to do with the Mraw Holds, or like something, information that we can get at the Mraw Holds.
From Kyber. So it might be from Kyber, which has...
You can access via...
Yeah.
Mraw. Yeah. Basically, there's a connection between the idea of like aberrations in Dalkia and the Mraw Holds specifically, and symbionts. So Warfred saying that he's from Mraw Holds, at least for Willow, was like another connection to this cult, because like you're from the place where they might source their materials, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, we later learned Nothics are also found around the Mraw Holds.
Exactly. So Willow started formulating like, okay, if there is any connection, then maybe this is like the beginning of it made him suspect. He's rich. He's from Rollhold. He spent time in Shan, which was another angle. And later he was seen speaking to Edmund. However, I will say, he wasn't speaking to Edmund. He wasn't speaking to Edmund.
He's speaking
speaking around Edmund. Yeah. Like, sorry. It was actually kind of embarrassing because, like, Warfred's talking quite earnestly about the morning painting. And basically, there was a big painting there that was like a reflection of the Mournlands, which is like it's this whitewash, misty, stormy looking painting. It's just massive and white, and it represents the storm, the magical mist that now stands where Ciri used to be. It's like a wall of shit. I can't even talk about it. Willow was avoiding it like the plague that night. Every time they walked past it. One of the times that they observed it by accident, because they were trying to observe Edmund, was when Warfred was talking to Edmund about it, and he was like transfixed by it. He's like, imagine seeing it in person. Can you imagine seeing everything you've known reduced to so much smoke? I think is what he said. Something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And Edmund, meanwhile, says nothing. So I get the impression from that conversation now, in retrospect, that Edmund was kind of like, why are you talking to me?
How dare you speak to me in public?
Yeah. and like Warfred with the energy of like, I don't know. Who knows yet? We don't know whether he has anything to do with Edmund. So ultimately, at the end of our conversations, one of the other things that happens is that Willow mentions their relationship with Ciri, which is that they aren't really from inside Ciri. They're not really not from Ciri. They're from a place that was ceded during the war. So whether they are Cirian or not is a big question. And then Warfred seems to be interested in that. He also is friends with Tarek. And from a distance, Willow's like making connections of like, you are interested in the morning. You're interested in the suffering caused by the morning. You are friends with Tarek Elhim, whose entire existence is Ciri exploded, and I'm sad about it. And you will not forget it. That kind of confronting thought. And Willow's like, well, that's relevant for me. So when Tarek Elhim freaking explodes also that night, the angle is that En and Luca are going to go and sort of introduce themselves to the detective, and Willow is going to go and capitalize off that interest that Warfred has in them or in their life experience, because as far as we know, looks at Luca, Willow is the only one that seems to have any kind of home experience with Ciri. So after discovering that Warfred is the one that actually painted Tarek's portrait, Willow decides to visit him and arrange to get a personal portrait done. The idea at this time, because we basically don't know whether he's just weird or if he's actually a snapdragon. And if he isn't a snapdragon, then one of Willow's thought processes is he can be used to lead to the snapdragons, depending on what kind of person he is. Because at the very early stages, he could have just been a ponce. Yeah?
Yep.
You agree, Rom? Yeah. So, he could just be a rich bastard. What's wrong with you? Wealth.
Yes.
Is what. Oh, and one of the things when we first did our consultation is that Warfred was like, how about for more privacy? Instead of doing our consultations at the studio, how about my personal studio? Because Willow was kind of approaching it from like, I have so many problems and you can articulate them in art. So, you know what? I would like for you to do a personal experimental project about me because you seem to see through me, so I'd like to see what you have to say. And then Warfred's like, ooh, fascinating. Let's go for it then. Anyway, so next day, go to his house, and he is... Okay, how do we begin to talk about this? He's grieving.
Is he now?
He's grieving. He lost his friend, and he's sad about it, I think. Because, like, when we go there, Willow is basically like, let's skip the small talk. I know you don't really give a shit about me as a person. Let's talk about trauma. Where were you during the morning? And Warfred was in Shan, at the time, and he saw the outpouring, the refugees that ended up coming from Syria down to Shan, and he was like, oh, that sucks. This should happen.
Sucks to be you.
Yeah. And then, but no, he was called back home for something. I don't know, something like that. Now he's ended up in Regalport for the past, I think, 2 years. I don't have my notes in front of me. Oh, I have notes. I just remembered. Warfred has been like my main focus for basically this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So 20th arranged for it. Oh, silly little goose. I noticed something very important on the 20th. Just before leaving, Willow checked him to see if he was wearing a Snapdragon pin. They didn't see a Snapdragon pin, but they saw that he had some kind of mark on his neck hidden by his beard. And Willow was like, I will log that away for later. 21st of Jirago comes. It's the first appointment with Warfred at his house, and Luca on standby, in case I get murdered, basically. And Fishdog is outside the house to fly to them to tell them I'm being murdered, just in case. But at this moment, we don't know whether I'm going to be murdered. We just kind of suspect that he has cult-ish tendencies. One of the things we should probably point out, too, about Tarek's death is it actually isn't in line with what we've expected from Snapdragons.
Yes. Right? From what N understands of, like, the profile of a Snapdragon victim, it's people who are down on their luck in one way or another. The poor, the disabled, you know, like, people who are in very vulnerable positions and also are unlikely to be noticed if they disappear, or at least not likely to, like, be followed up on their disappearance into public capacity in the same way, say, a minor to major celebrity might be.
Yeah. Which is bizarre, because one of the main through lines that ended up happening with Tarek is just the eyeball injury, and also the fact that he had a lot of trauma to dig from. Because, like, that's one of the unifying factors, too, yeah? It's, like, people that come from...
They gorge themselves on suffering, so they like to re-inflict that trauma upon their victims, which is what the stage show was really all about. The snuff theater was really about making these people relive their greatest traumas on stage for the enjoyment of an audience, and then die. Which is exactly what happened to Tarek. Long story short, that is how Tarek was killed. So though Tarek himself does not fit the profile and has come to expect of a Snapdragon, his death does.
Yeah. And we will touch on the soliloquy after Warfred. But for now, one of the main things we learn about Warfred at this first, or second technically, but first appointment at his house, is that he's obsessed with Tarek. Like, he thinks Tarek's a visionary. He loves his play. He's like, he seems to love the things that he makes, and also, by extension of that, he hates Myraldine, because he thinks that Myraldine is basically a bad match for Tarek because she's seen nowhere near his art. So, like, I am in love with Tarek's art. Thus, I hate the person that he is attached to who doesn't appreciate his art, who doesn't seem to see it. Like, that's the kind of impression that we ended up getting. At the same time, I rolled a nat 20 to insight his little fixation when I asked him about the death of Tarek, and Warfred, like, zoned out into a state of, like, horrid fascination. Like, disgust and fascination was kind of the feeling I was left with about how Warfred viewed the scene of Tarek's death. And it was like that's kind of, while that kind of reaction can be, air quotes, natural, like, you can have that kind of obsession with, like, you can kind of fixate on it's the car accident thing that people talk about, like, you can't look away from the scene of an awful, like, horrid thing that really, like, leaves you in shock.
It's not necessarily evil or inhuman to find fascination in really gruesome things. That's not, like, fundamentally makes you a terrible person. But but Warfred backs it up with so many other problems. It's like he ends up, the fuller picture isn't just like, I am disgusted and unfortunately, like, fixated on it. It's like there is something, it's the fascination part, I would say, specifically.
if you know, you just have to listen to the way Zeke describes it. It's so bad. And actually, oh my god, I keep forgetting I have all these notes.
Yeah, we've been making notes since the beginning, all of us. So
yeah,
there must be something you need written somewhere at this point.
Yeah. I remember because it's when I started using the word middle distance.
Yeah, that was the first meeting you had with him, I believe, because that's been plaguing us for a long time.
Yeah. Okay. Here, can I read it from what this is? Because I rolled a nat 20. I rolled Insight 22. So, Warfred says, "It is a great tragedy to have someone so brilliant snuffed out so suddenly and violently." And then Zeke says, so I say, I'm checking if he means this in a way of, "Ooh, that's sad," or is it like, spicy thought? Like, what's the genuine feeling behind what he's saying? Zeke says, "The genuine feeling behind the way he describes Elhim's death is a sort of disgusted fascination. He is not lying about being sad or that it's tragic, but he also seems like there's a sort of twisted fixation on it. The way he stares into the middle distance, you think he's probably revisiting the scene of the death. Like there's something he can't stop looking at about it." Oh, yuck.
Which, considering he was probably there while Tarek was being killed, takes on a different sort of context.
Don't worry, we'll talk about the soliloquy. At this time, Warfred just seems a bit odd. And then he launches directly from this to talking about, like, and it's odd that Myraldine hasn't publicized it. And he takes it that Myraldine is too proud, basically, to let the people know that Tarek Elhim died because she's protecting her reputation because their relationship was on the rocks, because they were arguing. And apparently had been for a while. Then when I tried to ask Warfred, of course, he has too much decorum to let me do that. So he's like, "I don't like to gossip about the dead, but I hate her fucking guts."
Doesn't show my hand, but...
yeah, but, ugh. So basically every chance, Willow was trying to gauge from him, like, how did you feel about Tarek? And the feeling they were left with this was like, not only are you obsessed with the scene of his death, but also, you don't see him as a person. One of the main recurring things that happened with Warfred is Willow's like, it's kind of sad that he was lost. And Warfred's like, "Oh yes, he was so good at his job. Oh, he was such a good artist. Oh, his work was so special and meaningful. Oh, he was like a lighthouse. He was like a beacon to people." And Willow's like, "A person has died." And he's like, "Yeah, great loss to the artistic community." And Willow's just like trying to lean, like, human being, dead now. Warfred, like, property, lost. It's a fascinating thing that I realized upon transcribing again. Like, he never describes him as a person, ever. It's so, ugh.
It's almost like he's lacking in any humanity at all.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So
yeah, he would have been that.
So Warfred says, "I fear I might be haunted by that man." God, skip a bit, because Warfred just continues being odd for that whole thing, and deeply troubled by the death of his friend. Then Willow decides to... He basically switches gears back to, like, trying to figure out stuff about Willow. First of all, by analyzing their mask, which is the other super duper creepy part of that session. Mm-hmm. That section.
That section is always is pictured in my mind as such like a horror movie scene.
Yeah.
And the way he examines Willow's / Gil's mask. It's like the unwelcome intimacy.
Yeah, like, I hate that you have to use that word because it's accurate.
Uh-huh. I don't like it either, but...
it is unpleasantly invasive. And, like, one of the things he kept gunning for was, "I want to see your mask up close. Can you remove it?" And Willow was like, "Nah, but you can have a closer look." Willow's intention was to try and gauge something off him, like check him for magical ability or do an identifier or something. But, like, ultimately, Warfred put them off too much to actually do anything because Willow could not tell whether he could see through their mask. That was a kind of invasive look about him. It was like Willow actually asked him, like, "Do you see through my mask?" And he was like, "No." And then when I rolled for it, Zeke was like, "You can't tell." I'm like, "What the fuck do you mean I can't tell?" "Can you see through metal, Kent? I don't know what's happening." So, yeah, that was scary. Long story short, yeah, had just a terrible first meeting with him. But at the time, didn't realize how terrible.
Yeah, this was just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah. So basically, what Willow ends up doing is saying, how about we'll do a wager for it, because that's kind of like a recurring Willow thing. We'll bet on it. I haven't figured out the parameters yet, but if you win, you get to see behind my mask. And Wilfred's like, okay, sure, why not? Let's play a little stupid game. So next time I visit Wilfred, we start playing the truth game. Oh my god. Which is basically the premise of it is like, there are certain conversations that we can't have in polite company. So let's skip the small talk and go straight to the stuff that we're both interested in. You have a morbid fascination with like death, with suffering, and that is an okay thing to have. I have so much suffering, and I have trouble talking. So let's play a game about it. That's basically the premise of it. Willow's like, I have trouble speaking. You're asking me personal questions. I don't know how to respond to them because I've been lying for so long, basically. So feel free to make a game out of it. Gamifies your therapy, basically. And I must mention that everything that Willow says to Wilfred literally is true. And it is the first time they have probably said a lot of it to anybody in the past 4 to 5 years. So that's fucked. But the method works, I guess. Right, Rum?
I guess. I can't fault you since I've also started to use this method in recent history. So, like, sometimes the best way to get a, like, asshole who's got his head up, upset asshole, to slip up is to just offer them something they can't refuse.
Yeah. It was like you like Syrian tragedy? I have that by the spades. It was just funny because like in this is the arc where Willow's basically just admitted that they do have that tragedy and it's personal to them. Mm-hmm. I will say in their defense, just in case anyone isn't clicking to, Willow finds it a lot easier to talk about the shit they've done to people who are bad. Because they don't like to lose the positive opinions of people that are good. I will say that it is much easier to talk to Wilfred about the shit that you've done that you hate about yourself than it is to talk to, like, say, Luca and be, I don't know, berated. Or, like, put yourself forward as vulnerable to someone whose opinion you actually care about. So there is an element of reason to it. It's just not very good. Let that be known. This is kind of me filling out the emotional beats part of last episode that I couldn't get into because so much of it is hinged around Wilfred. But long story short, Willow tells the truth for all of this. They ask some invasive questions of each other. Willow basically immediately asks, do you kill for your art? And Wilfred's like, no. If I didn't know any better, I'd think that you were accusing me of the murder. And Willow's like, haha. Anyway. And Wilfred apparently saw me steal from an antiquities shop, which is that funny little joke video that Rom made. Not so funny that when I reflect and think that the person that saw the shady shifter was actually Wilfred taking a midnight stroll. So,
as you do.
As you do. And he recognized me. Which, like, very observant, but also, stop.
Don't do that. Don't be weird.
He's so unnerving. He's a very unnerving character. So he basically is like, so how long have you been a scoundrel? How long have you been a thief and a villain? Not a villain. What do you call me? A scoundrel? There's another like very
degenerate
word
came to mind, but I don't think he used that word.
Shit.
Did he use it? I don't think so.
I don't think he used it then. I'm just gonna. Anyway, either way, he was leaning into a bit of a different tune about it. Also, something I find quite interesting, he changed the rules of the game. Willow put forward some rules, he changed them, and then we played basically the game that he had suggested, which was collaborative. But I was also looking at him like game maker. Like, are you interested in Snapdragon stage show? Snapdragon's game show, like a variety, like the Korean ones.
I wouldn't be surprised if they were in the 21st century.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, they keep going back and forth until eventually Wilfred asks about like the worst injury that Willow's had, and then Willow's like, my eyes, and then he finally slips and lets that fascination. Okay, the only way I have been able to refer to it, though feel free to give me another word, is his appetite for like tragedy. Seems to show in this case. I always I think it's funny that Baku like related him sort of to like Dracula kind of stuff, because that's the kind of appetite I'm referring to. It's almost like it's like when an animal sees something that they are going to attack. It's like
I'd say appetite is a appropriate word to use here, especially since we have our suspicions that there may be some near literal feeding going on with the snapdragons here when it comes to suffering and death.
Yeah, if you think about it, Edmund Beckett literally drinks tears of a widow. So there is like that semblance of like appetite there. It's reducing people and their feelings to something like food. It's like consumption. Consumer culture. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. Oh,
there we go.
The capitalists. Yeah.
The true evil all along.
Yeah. No, it's literally the. Oh my god, it's so cleverly written. I hate it here. You're all sick. Pats everyone on the head. Anyway, so Wilfred's air quotes appetite is piqued in that moment, and he's basically like, "What happened?" And Willow's like, "That's for another time. That's for your next question. You can't ask that in the same question." And then Willow instead turns it back to him and says, "What's with the scratch on your neck?" Because Willow asked him earlier. Willow pointed out, like, "Oh, your scratch is healing," and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I must have cut myself shaving or something."
Yeah,
and
that was his excuse.
Yeah, and I insight checked him, and I knew he was lying, so I was holding that until I asked him, and then he was like, he kept denying it, and then I pushed it, and I was like, "What if I think you're lying?" And then he wiped my memory.
Yep. Guy couldn't stand to lose. Also, it was possibly a very incriminating mark on his neck. So he went ahead and wiped 10 minutes of Willow's memory. So that included confronting him about the scratch.
Yep.
And Willow has yet to know that happened to them ever at any point.
Yeah.
Yet to figure that out. They may never.
Yeah. They may. Yeah. It was so bad. He's like, "Oh, I'm so fascinated by the truth." Willow's like, "Okay, tell the truth then." Bazunk, and just like zonked my memories of the occasion, 10 minutes. And then I just ended the appointment, and I didn't really know why. Like, I knew why. It was because he ran out of time, and we rescheduled for the next evening, nighttime. Sus. So I left that situation none the wiser. Then the next day I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that. I feel like I'm going to die. You know, like there's something
off about all this.
Yeah, Willow still knows that he was lying about the neck injury, so Willow now expects that is incriminating. They just don't know how. Presumably they could have figured out how in that moment, and that's why he wiped their freaking brain. He could have confessed in that moment, you know?
Could have done a lot of things in those 10 minutes that Willow lost. We just don't know.
Yeah, scary. So the point is though, next day I'm like, not next day. Next day I went to him early in the morning to reschedule, and that's where we bring back Mr. Alonso, because who do we see talking with Wilfred outside the Gilded Brush? Alonso Reedfort. And that is the first confirmation on the 25th of Travago, the first confirmation we get that those two have anything to do with one another. Because I asked him at the previous interview, "Do you know anything about Edmund Beckett?" And Wilfred was like, "Well, he's very hard to get a hold of. So, like, he's a very busy man." What we then learn through his conversation with Alonso is that Wilfred's kind of vying for Edmund Beckett's attention. Would you say that?
Yeah.
An audience with Edmund Beckett.
Yeah, definitely for his attention and approval. It seems like Edmund was there in part to evaluate Wilfred's quote-unquote art. So, and he seems to have failed because Alonso suggests in that conversation that Edmund was not impressed with Warfred's work, and that Warfred's next piece, or most recent piece, however it was described, will be judged by Alonso's discerning eye instead, because Edmund is returning to Sharn, leaving Alonso in his wake. So Alonso will evaluate if Warfred is worthy of what we can only assume being, if not an interest to Edmund, then an interest to the Snapdragons.
Rob, do you want to do a dramatic rereading of the conversation? Because it's short.
Sure.
You can be Alonso, I'll be Warfred. We're role-playing the show that we role-play.
Well, this was all Zeke, so we didn't have a hand in this.
Yeah, this is all Zeke. I rolled such a good stealth check and a great perception as well.
Yeah, you did really well during that part, and both me and Zeke were very excited in that moment.
Yeah, I assume Sarah too, but Luca's just off in the distance petting small birds and whatnot.
Being a Disney princess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Luca's having trauma nightmares that day, I think, actually.
Something like that. I'm sure it's fine.
Okay.
So, Alonso says, "My master was not overly impressed by your showing at the gallery even before the debacle of the night unfolded."
And Warfred insists, "But my latest piece
will be judged by my eyes before I can recommend you to my master."
And Warfred falls silent, and he does the little, he's put in his place.
"Are you dissatisfied with that? Does it frustrate you to not be fed your silver spoon? I thought you prided yourself on your equanimity."
Equanimity! I'm so, Alonso sucks, honestly. But
yeah, they both suck, but seeing them beat the shit out of each other, or at least Alonso beat the shit out of Warfred, is so satisfying.
Yes, okay, and then Warfred responds, "Fine, if I must stoop before I rise to greatness, so be it. The brightest jewels are found in the darkest depths, as the saying goes."
Alonso adjusts his glasses. "We shall certainly see. You may contact me," hands him a business card. "Sir Beckett is leaving Regalport. He will likely not return, unless there is reason. Good day to you, sir."
And then I rolled an 8 insight, and I couldn't tell what Warfred was thinking because I was too well concealed. But I like to think that he was standing there fuming, because one of the first things we learned about Warfred was that he didn't like that I referred to him as Warfred. He didn't like the over-familiarity, and to an extent, I imagine that he didn't like the disrespect of pretending to be on the same level as him enough to be to call him Warfred instead of Mr. Bartosz. So Willow calls him Mr. Bartosz the rest of the time because they're air quotes being friends with him. Mm-hmm. But that little note of his pride was very much noted. I also think it speaks a lot about Warfred that he assumes that Myraldine is too proud to get anything done, because he's the kind of person where his life view, kind of like Errol, which is a comparison that would make him die on the spot, but kind of like Errol, he has the blinders of his circumstance on, which makes me think he comes from arguably at this stage we assume he is a dwarf that comes from a very wealthy birthright. Mm-hmm. So he just, of course he's going to assume it must be pride that she is protecting and not genuine love or something, So he just got shitted on in this moment by Alonso, and it gave us the first impression we've gotten thus far of the pecking order of this event, which is not just that Alonso and Warfred are working together, but that Alonso is more superior to Warfred because Warfred is vying for something from Edmund.
Yes.
Yeah, which is it was our first confirmation. It blew open a lot of new possibilities and basically confirmed for us for the first time that the Edmund scheme might be related to the Warfred scheme. However, if I may mention, did we want to mention the resurrection thing now?
Might as well. I feel like that's the next major thing with Warfred, really.
Yeah, his conversation with Myraldine.
Yeah.
First of all, we'll talk about his presence at the
memorial.
memorial.
Yeah.
Because Warfred was at the memorial. He is one of the only people that was brave enough to come to the memorial and give tribute to Tarek Elhim. Because everyone else was too much of a coward to show up and pay their respects, and Miraldine, the bastard, did not publicize his death. So now Tarek Elhim goes unrecognized at a lonely shrine in some plebeian memorial. That is the vibe that.
Yeah, describing like that just makes me want to strangle him more, because Tassie also was
right
at the memorial. But anyway, we don't have to talk about Tassie today. We've done enough.
It does suck though. It's very. I don't think that's what he said, but like.
No, that's not what he said. But like, you know, like there's a vibe there. He's a rich little bastard. You know, he was thinking it.
Yeah, it's. I'm sure he was expecting like a procession.
Technically,
like, through the streets of Regalport.
He wasn't thinking that. I know for a fact that's not what he was thinking.
So true. Say it.
Because at the memorial, N read Warfred's mind and did a little sneaky surface read of Warfred's thoughts. And the odd thing about that is N specifically targeted Warfred's thoughts from Warfred. And in that moment, they instead heard a strange feedback loop of Willow's thoughts. Which is not what N was going for. So what that leads N to believe, if not completely confirms, is that Warfred also has the ability to read minds and was doing so to Willow at that very moment. And we don't know when that has occurred previously, if ever, if this was the first incident. All we know now is that Warfred is very capable of that. So Warfred is capable of reading minds, and as you might recall, that is a certain attribute that we have also associated with the Snapdragons, and that is an ability that obviously N has as a carrier of one of these strange Eldritch eyeballs. So it's just a red flag of an ability, all things considered. I am a walking red flag, so I will wear that probably myself.
Yep.
But yeah. Not only does he have the ability to read minds, which I found out in a very funny way. That's both
so
funny, strange, and funny, haha. Like it's a gallows humor kind of moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we found that out about Warfred, but that's not all we found out about Warfred at the memorial. Not all the new information we got on him, because Willow also noticed something while speaking with him at the memorial.
I did. I noticed a silver pin on his lapel. Which is our first proof that Warfred is, for sure, affiliated with the Snapdragons. This is interesting, too, because one of the thoughts I had when he was talking to Alonso was, is he trying to become a Snapdragon? Mm-hmm. And the pin is proof that, no, whatever that unit is, he's already a part of it. So that means that he is probably trying to rise through the ranks, or trying to get some sort of glory within the ranks. And the way I've described it in Willow's journal is like, obviously there is a pecking order because Edmund is esteemed and Edmund has a butler. So like if there is something there about that hierarchy. Yeah. Warfred is below even the butler.
And my theory is that we've seen Edmund wearing a pin, and as far as N remembers, Edmund was exclusively an audience member at the Snapdragon Theater event. This is significant because there were audience members, and then there were stagehands. There were people like arranging and facilitating the on-stage murders who are working on the stage. And my theory is that Warfred wants to be a stagehand, not just an audience member, because the pin could be a signifier of an audience member, not necessarily someone who actually plans out and helps execute the victims on stage.
Yeah. I also suspect this because not only has he got his fascination with Tarek and the stage shows and all of that, but also he values himself as an artist. And obviously an artist isn't going to sit there and look at other people's artwork. You want to make the artwork yourself. He seems to specifically specialize in creating art that evokes emotions in other people. So, there was one more thing I wanted to say about that, but I forgot. It just slipped off my mind. like speaking of theories, I'll say it when it comes back to me.
Yep.
But and that would mean then that killing Tarek in this case, we kind of suspected that this was like an audition.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
his artwork might not have done it, but then maybe his involvement in possibly killing Tarek Elham might have been like
an attempt,
his proof.
Yeah, to impress Edmund all the way to the stage, so to speak.
Yeah, because everyone at the auction, the fact of Tarek's death being like really public was a notable part of it. Like, it was a very like, who was this made for? Why did they want people to see it? Yeah. And then Warfred's also out here like, oh, I wish Merilene would put it in the papers. Why is she not putting it in the papers so that everyone can see? Willow's literally like, because it's troubling. And he's like, no, it's because she's selfish, actually. And Willow's like, okay, you are broken. Not in the way that me and all my friends are broken too, like something else. What were you gonna say, Rom?
Like the Tarek Elham and his murder, quite possibly being Warfred's doing it, being such an artistic arrangement, reminds me of like an initiation with a gang. Like, you have to go out and kill a guy to become a full-fledged member of a gang. That whole kind of trope. Except in this case, it's like you have to make a snuff art piece in order to be considered as one of the stagehands for our prestigious murder theaters.
Yeah, and I also wonder too if the intention was even Tarek, like from Edmund, or if it was just that Warfred is like manipulated. I wonder, because like if Warfred is not privy, and we find out later he is not privy to all the pieces that Alonso and Edmund are, then there's a chance that he's being manipulated just like everyone else to do things for them. So it's interesting to see like how much information has actually been blocked and given, and how much of this Warfred thinks is his own plans versus how much might actually be him getting puppeted himself. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to think about, because we know thus far that he doesn't have the same agency in the Snapdragons.
And speaking of that push and pull of information, and Warfred perhaps not being as in the loop as some other people, Warfred finds out something very special a few days after the memorial.
Oh man, we have to talk. So, 2 days after the memorial, first of all, Warfred's like, I can't possibly do your artwork right now, Willow. I'm too distressed. Oh my god. Saying Willow in his air quotes fake voice made me panic. He doesn't know Willow's name. So. Not yet. Hopefully.
Not that we know of.
Not that we know of. So Gil is how he refers. Well, he doesn't actually refer to Gil at all. I don't think he's ever said Willow's name. Oh, he has. Anyway, not the point. Basically, he was like, I'm too sad to write a haiku. I would I'm too sad to write haiku. And so he's like, we need to reschedule until I'll message you, basically, when I'm ready to do your commission. Yeah. And then Willow's like, sure, no worries, we'll reschedule our third appointment. Good luck. And he's like, yes, I'll show you some of Tarek's greatest hits. Okay? And we're like, sure. Okay, so we peace out. Next 2 days. No, sorry. What was the date of that one? That was on 27th. So 28th passes. On the 1st of the new month, Regal Port's covered in paint.
Hate the town, as it were.
Yeah, there's been vandalism at the Galleria of Shadows, accusing House Thorani of covering up Tarek's death. Or of like not admitting that their playwright is dead. There's paint all over all of Tarek's folly posters that are like, Tarek Elham died in silence, Thorani, there's blood on your hands, all of that kind of stuff. There's rumors that in the paper that they did it to sell seats, like it's a controversy being stoked up to inspire people to buy tickets to the folly. Someone has tipped off at least 3 publications. Sorry, tipped off at least 2 publications. The Regal Port Herald is just responding to the vandalism, but Panoply, which N investigated, was what happened there?
We discover, and discovers through their investigation of the Monopoly, that not only was the journalist behind the article that talks about Tarek's death and the possible, not controversy, but what's the word? plots behind it. Conspiracy. That's the C word I'm looking for. Conspiracy.
I can think of a few other C words.
And the whole potential conspiracy behind it. And what N finds odd is that there seems to be a disparity between what the writer of the article was intending and what ended up actually being published in the Panoply itself. So, N goes and does some more investigation around the publishing, printing press itself, and through a combination of conversation, mind reading, and that investigation, they come to the conclusion that the article was tampered with on the way to the printing press. So not only was the journalist tipped off by an anonymous source, which
anonymous?
It's already a bit suspect, that her article was also tampered with on the way to the press. So there was someone pulling the strings behind the printing of that article from start to finish.
Yeah. And speaking of strings being pulled, there was also there's a shit-kicking newspaper that
Gossip Rag.
Gossip Rag. It's not really a paper. It's his magazine that shares basically whatever comes through its doors. And we find out via Willow going there and doing morally grey things that it was a tip-off by a fancy-looking dwarven fella wearing rings. This is something that we caught as evidence. That little description of who sounds like Warfred. But the things that were delivered to that paper, to the Gossip Rags, were like Miraldine did it. There was a what's the word? An affair, like Tarek had an affair with a leading lady, or there was someone who was interested in Miraldine and thus killed Tarek to get her, like that kind of thing. Bottom of the barrel nonsense.
Yeah,
that's Willow's
bullshit.
Yeah, Willow decided to be like, well, I can tell you something interesting if you tell me the identity of the person that told you, because this is an irreputable place that will give out the names of their tip-offs. And yeah, so Willow's like, Tarek Elham was poisoned, and the guy was like, whoa, okay, Warfred Bartosz did it.
He didn't say that, but he certainly said the next best thing.
Yeah. And the thing is, with basically how Warfred was talking at the memorial, and all of the messages that ended up on town have the same tone of voice. They use the same words of like, how dare you cover up his death? How dare you not let people know that they should be grieving Tarek Elham, you know? And he seems genuinely personally slighted by it. Basically, everyone and their dog, other than Warfred, got accused of murder that day. Or at least for covering up murder.
Everyone and their dog, that's Elar, the old knife, and the puppy Ryger.
Oh my god. Yeah, so that's the day. And then Luca's looking after Miraldine that day. Miraldine walks out and is... what is the word?
Accosted.
Accosted, perfect word. Accosted by Warfred Bartosz with flowers. Do you want to take this one, Ron?
Yeah, so Warfred shows up, as he fucking does.
During the daytime this time.
Yeah, he has the goddamn gall to step between Miraldine and the cab she wants to take from the Port Authority to her ship, which, you know, in and of itself is a dick move. But then he also has the audacity to poke and prod at Miraldine about her possible involvement in the murder of Tarek Elham, because she's the prime suspect right now. Spoiler alert, she's not, and we've all but confirmed she's being framed by Warfred, or at least he's attempting to, quite stubbornly. Put a pin in that little shit show he's attempting to put on. And through this prodding, Miraldine, who has just had the worst 2 weeks recently, finally snaps and tells Warfred essentially, I don't know who killed him. I guess I'll ask him when he comes back to life, when I resurrect him. And this is news to Warfred Bartosz, because previously this is information that Miraldine has kept under wraps, and we really only learned it because N became involved with the primary detective on the case very early on, so was given this information very early. Warfred has not been investigating the death of Tarek Elham since he caused it, so he is not, been learning these nitty-gritty details. So this is the first time he's heard about this, and he is, as Zeke describes, gobsmacked.
Yeah.
And Meraldine does not literally, but in every other possible sense, steps on Warfred on the way into her cab. So now Warfred has this new avenue to contend with, which is Tarek as a very real possibility of being revived.
Luckily, though, he doesn't have anything to say about it, does he? Should we talk about the soliloquy?
I think it's about time.
About damn time. So, earlier in campaign, and this is going to be part of Meraldine's, furthermore of what we say that we kind of air quotes proved that Meraldine didn't do it. Meraldine was involved in staging Luca and Anne and Secret Elsa and Brina arranged a speak with dead ritual for Tarek Elham. So we needed permission from Meraldine to go in and conduct a necromancy
Ritual?
No, like a test to get his testimony, but in a dead way. I wasn't actually here for this. Willow was avoiding this conversation like the plague, because obviously the death of Tarek affects them quite differently, and the idea of resurrection and thus necromancy in general kind of weirds them out. Not weirds them out, but it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you guys did this.
Yes, Luca and Elsa facilitated the Speak with Dead ritual, which Captain Meraldine insisted on being present for. N was not in the room during this ritual, but they were just outside of it, reading Meraldine's mind during, and this is one of the reasons that we are 100% convinced Meraldine did not kill Tarek, because her thoughts were ones of shock and horror and general discomfort over everything Tarek said. There is nothing there to suggest the possibility that she was involved.
Yeah. One of the first things that happens in the soliloquy is that Tarek describes that he was outside to get some air to settle down after his argument with Meraldine. He gets some air, he comes back inside, he sees Meraldine, and she's walking into the gallery, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go and rectify things after we've just had an argument. Then he gets in there, Meraldine, in his poetic way, unfurls into a monster.
Which, not a great start to trying to rectify an argument.
Not really conducive to a nice conversation.
I mean, maybe it's just the poetic way of saying she started the argument right back up in the most easy way possible, but the way he continues to describe the situation dismisses that interpretation pretty quickly.
Yeah. Like if you're listening to this and it's like, what is he saying? He says, strands of flesh and a dozen roving eyes protruding from makeshift sockets to stare, unblinking. I am pierced, pinned like a moth. And then in your mind, you're like, oh, is that like an analogy?
Oh, are you losing the argument?
Tarek, when he's losing an argument, starts comparing you to an aberration. Like, oh, I see. Yes, your tendrils are unfolding now and wrapping around my throat. No, this is so literal. This is very literal.
We must note before this as well that one of the early lines in the soliloquy also mentions a silver pin, a silver face of tragedy.
Yeah, I had to leave that one for you to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's sauce. From a distance, the silver face of tragedy doesn't make any sense. It could be like, well, Meraldine's not silver, but then we'd be like, maybe the monster that she turned into was silver. But no, we know that the silver face of tragedy is the Snapdragon pin. And as we also know, only 2 other people were seen wearing that pin that we know of. Alonso could have also been wearing the pin, but we didn't know to look for it at the time. And what we've gathered is that they only wear the pins at special events that we know of. Because it's like when other bitches are gonna see it. I wear my tragedy pins so that other tragic bitches can see it and be like, hello, fellow fucker.
Yeah, exactly.
Think of another way to say it.
That's exactly what they say
Yeah.
when they approach each other at these special events.
Yes. Ugh. So Tarek is being also accosted, but worse, by this horrific monster that he's describing.
It's much less funny when it happens to him.
Yeah. Um, so it seems to literally what's the word I'm looking for? Bind him? In some way. Paralyze him, yeah. He is pinned in whatever way. He starts crying, and it seems like the monster is drinking it. That's how I interpret my eyes water and the tendrils sup the tears like greedy roots after drought. It's like, I am being bound by vines, and the vines are my tears, literally. That's how I interpret that one. We had a whole stream doing the breakdown of this one, so this is just a quick version. Basically, Tarek ends up in what seems to be a monster-induced live nightmare where he relives the events of the morning and thus describes the events of the morning in explicit detail.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to look, he doesn't want to see, he tries to break free from the flesh-wrought chains that bind me. Oh, he is such a... Wish he weren't dead. God. But his career. I wish he were more famous. That's something that, like, basically the paraphrase of what Warford wrote on his funeral note to Tarek. Wish everyone knew you were more famous. Jeez. God.
It's a true tragedy here.
Anyway. Yeah. Tarek basically is forced to relive this situation while he begs and cries to please not be made witness to it again. And with his last piece of strength, he tries to strangle his foe. And you know where strangles Rom, where does a strangle take place?
I mean, traditionally around the neck.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is there anything about a neck injury recently?
I don't know. I feel like maybe our mind was wiped about that one.
Fine! Yeah, exactly. And this is the sus part. So we didn't discuss this on stream, but after stream I was looking at this verse. But as my dying breath escapes my lips... Rom, do you want to say it?
As my dying breath escapes my lips, visions of that calamity persist. All I can do is watch the end of the world. All I can do is witness the horror as the tyrant yet feeds upon my fear. No more, if death must take me, make it dark and silent. Make me look at it no more. So
basically, what this confirms is that whoever killed Tarek, A, was a monster. They either were a monster or had a monster in their pockets, which is a thing that can happen because the undead were also concealed.
Smuggled
tiny
in,
little shrink me down.
Little shrinky dinks.
Yeah. What are those dinosaur sponges that you like pour water on and they get very big?
I don't know what they're called, but yes, they were compared to that.
Yeah. So there was a monster at the site of Tarek's death. We know this because there was tendon found under his nails. And also that whoever was there, it was air quotes Meraldine, the last person he saw, and she was wearing a tragedy pin, silver tragedy pin, and that he was forced to relive his worst trauma.
Yeah.
Now, Meraldine's reaction to this, you can talk a bit about Meraldine's reaction to it, because that was important.
She was horrified by this revelation, and she just wanted to know who did this to Tarek.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the predominant emotion. She was just very horrified about what happened to him. And I'm sure that's very much spurred her thirst for justice.
Yeah. She also commented on the... Yeah, right. She also commented on the fact that, like, the last person that Tarek saw was her.
Yes.
I also want to just grievously draw attention back to the fact that Meraldine left the auction hall at some stage to look for Tarek, and then commented that she saw him and he looked angry, so she came back upset. I don't know if that was him.
At this point, we have a lot of different avenues with which someone could imitate Tarek in Meraldine's eyes briefly.
Yeah, or Meroline and Tarek's.
Yeah, both.
The thing that defines the Tarek one is that we found tendon under his nails that isn't human.
Yes.
So, or dwarven in whatever way. So, like, it's implying that there was literally
monster.
something else there.
It's monster tendon.
Yeah. So, but Meroline is shitty about that, troubled by all of that. And also, the other thing that we learn is that she doesn't know why she accused Errol.
Yeah.
She doesn't know why she had that outburst.
Yeah. Another thing that Anne learns by reading her mind is that she doesn't know why she accused Errol. She doesn't really believe it in hindsight. So what led her to do that? And what is a kind of magic we've been suspecting from the Snapdragons? And can confirm they can do mind reading, but it's not out of the question that they can do mind wiping or other such manipulative magics, illusions, and whatnot. So the fact that Meroline has potentially been manipulated to support a certain angle in terms of who to pursue as the culprit in this crime, it's suspicious.
This all kind of comes together too when we visit her house. Tarek's house. Horrible slip up to make. If you wanted to talk about what you found there.
Yeah, so when we were investigating Tarek's apartment, we were searching for poison because Tarek was being poisoned by mercury leading up to his death. So that was one reason why he was probably being cranky and sickly, generally seen as sickly at the event, because he has been being poisoned for a month, if not months. So that was one thing we were investigating when we investigated Tarek's apartment. Brina was using Detect Poison and Disease, and we discovered there was so much mercury laced into the teapot, into an ink pot, and into multiple cosmetics that Tarek would have used frequently. And one of the unifying factors of all of these laced items is that they were gifts from Meroline.
Yeah.
So that paints a pretty specific picture.
Yeah. At which point Meroline points out, like, okay, she was not only the last person that Tarek claims he saw, but also this very obvious attempt to frame her she's getting lined up for being framed. If anything's going to fall back, it's going to fall back on her. Simultaneously, though, we do find proof in Tarek's journal that he was having the appointments with Warford at his house. The portrait was getting painted in his own studio, in his own office, where he does his writing.
Yeah.
So like the painting itself is kind of proof too that Warford was in the house.
The painting, the background of the painting was Tarek's office. Yeah.
So that's part of our evidence list as well. And that means that earlier on we were like, who had space to poison him for such a long time in microdoses? Like, who not just fed him poison like in a cup, but like who kept poisoning him? Of course your attention goes to Meroline because they are close and they are lovers. But then the attention also goes to the only other like main person that we know confirmed spent time alone with Tarek. Especially because Meroline's working. Like she works on a ship in the harbor. So that's all playing together with this. Oh, and what else did you find in the room?
Oh, we also found the other half of Edmund's correspondence with Tarek, asking for the play to be brought to Sharn. And this time, because Anne is working as Brina's assistant, Anne was allowed to confiscate that letter for evidence. So now we have proof that Edmund wanted to take Tarek's play to Sharn.
And was rejected.
Yes.
Important.
That was confirmed by Meroline.
Yeah.
So even though we don't have the other half of that letter, we do have verbal testimony.
Yes. And speaking of, see now that would be kind of proof, right? That if Tarek has died and Edmund has this goal to, maybe take the play to Sean for whatever reason that Wilfred, Edmund, and Alonso are all working together. But as we mentioned before, Wilfred was unaware that resurrection was an option. Edmund was aware that resurrection was not only an option, but the option being pursued. Enough so that Edmund actually offered money to Meraldine for the resurrection. Presumably, then, Alonso also knows about the resurrection. I'm going to bring up now... Stands to reason. Because they have, presumably, the same goals, the end goals. So that's funny. And I think it's worthwhile bringing up now that Alonso has different information than Wilfred.
Yes.
And I feel like that came to a peak with Alonso approaching Luca. At least it came very swiftly to my attention, because Alonso hasn't made contact with us before. No one's really made contact with Alonso, but Alonso out of nowhere approaches Luca, basically asks like, "Hey, I've noticed you around. What are you doing?" And then decides to be like, make a statement about like Damon, saying Damon can't be trusted, basically. Which is sus. It's random to come out and say that, and we know from the background that presumably they'd be in the know about like our little crew, because Edmund gave Damon a look back at the auction where I imagine that look was put a pin in that, keep an eye on that, Alonso,
something happened there.
Yeah, the way Zeke said it is always stuck in my mind, of like he looks just a little too long at Damon's back as he's retreating.
Mm-hmm.
And so the impression I got from Luca being approached and it being about Damon and it being about like Loki slandering Damon was that Alonso might have an idea of our whole team working to incriminate or otherwise get in the way of whatever's happening here. And it wasn't until like right now that it needed to be brought up. But that's again speculation. We don't fully know what Alonso's angle is. We just assume that he's trying to break the team up. Meanwhile, Wilfred, what did you spot on your stakeout?
During our stakeout, which happens after the investigation of Wilfred's apartment, is we recruit Meraldine and Rena recruit Meraldine onto their plans to stake Wilfred's apartment out in hopes of catching him slipping, because our suspicion that Tarek's murder might have involvement in a much larger scheme than just a single killer out for a single man. And we want evidence of that larger scheme instead of just sticking a sword through Wilfred's throat. So we begin a stakeout, and on that stakeout, N observes not only Wilfred returning to his apartment stressed, and this is post him learning about the resurrection plans, but then Alonso coming to visit Wilfred at his apartment. So that continues to prove that Alonso and Wilfred's contact is like not just incidental or accidental.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very, or at least a degree of intention behind it. Enough for Alonso to be making a house call.
Yep. Which is sauce.
It sure is.
Man. So we don't know the nature of the conversation that might have happened there. I like to think
we know
that
it's
Alonso
short.
was sitting... Yeah, it is pretty short. I like to think that Alonso was sitting there like, oh, what, you didn't know? You didn't know that there was a resurrection? Interesting. You should really look out for these kinds of things if you want to be interested, if you want to be considered for the stage shows. Like, I imagine it was that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then Wilfred's just sitting there,
funny.
like, festering. Yeah. But, because Wilfred's scared. Not scared, but...
He's stressed.
Well, yeah, I'd say he's stressed. He's stressed. And one thing I find very funny, too, is that if he had just let me talk, if he had let me finish, I would have told him that the resurrection was happening. Which is so funny to think about. 3 times, at least. Maybe twice, at least. But I'm going to say 3 times max, at least. 3 times maximum, at least, to minimum to maximum. Wilfred missed opportunities for me to ask him about the resurrection. And I'm blaming that on him because he wiped my memory before I could get to my last question.
So really, this is your fault.
Yeah, literally. Because if he had just let me speak, if he had not wiped my memory, my next question was going to be, how do you feel about the resurrection? And he would have been like, what resurrection? And I would have been like, oh, you don't know? And that would have been like, oh, that would have completely changed the direction of the plot, but at least I would have clued him in sooner than his own bloody accomplices would. They're not really even accomplices at this stage because they're not working together.
Yeah, at this point...
She's too busy being a little self-centered bitch. So he didn't get to know.
As usual.
So sucked in. And I'm so glad that Meraldine got to, throw salt directly in his eyeballs. But speaking of Meraldine, the final piece of this building puzzle. Meraldine's visit to Luca.
Yes. So the stakeout is being taken and shipped because you obviously can't have one person standing outside someone's apartment for hours and hours on end without giving them some sort of reprieve, a chance to go eat, sleep, all the necessary.
Rave, repeat.
Yes. Exactly. That's certainly what I did. So we had been cycling between Luca, Brina, and Brina's assistant, Celia. And so far everything had been going hunky-dory, because I have reason to believe Luca's mind got read during that stakeout too. But that's a minor inconvenience compared to what happens later on his stakeout shift further down the line. So Luca's staking out Orfred's apartment. He gets distracted by a box of kittens, which, it's a stakeout, so that's not the most ideal. Getting distracted by anything is really not what you want on a stakeout, but it is a box of kittens, so I can also understand how your attention might drift.
Yes.
Well, he is distracted by this box of kittens. He is approached by Meraldine, and at this point, they've started to build a rapport that is not entirely in the negatives. Luca has acted as Meraldine's bodyguard when things started to heat up thanks to the presses releasing all the stories about Tarek's death. And in that time, they developed a bit of a rapport that actually had Meraldine kind of seeming to maybe marginally respect Luca. At least what Luca is good at, which is being a shit brickhouse beefcake man who wards off unwanted attention. And he's good at fighting. They sparred, and it was cool. So when Meraldine shows up, in the middle of the night, while Luca is admiring this box of kittens, Luca...
nighttime show, as it were. Sorry, carry on. Sorry.
Luca is really not all that suspicious of her showing up like that. So they have a little conversation, and Meraldine offers to help him rehome those kittens he found, which, that's a nice thing for Meraldine to do. So they go off to a local bar, which, you're on a stakeout, Luca.
I know! What? Meraldine invites you out for a drink, and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm not doing anything else important, I guess. You're on a stakeout!
I mean, to give Luca the benefit of the doubt, I can see him thinking, oh, I'll just drop these kittens off, and I'll be right back. What could happen in 15 minutes?
Yeah.
It's not ideal, but I can see where the logic lies. It's a box of
4 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a box of kittens, and Meraldine is also in a very emotionally distressed state. So he wants to be there for her, and you can't just turn down a beverage with Meraldine. She's being real with him for the first time. So which is not suspicious at all. It's not suspicious at all that the girl boss has suddenly decided to confide in you. Yeah, that's not a suspicious thing. Sometimes people just do that.
So they go to the bar, and the owner of the bar agrees to take the kittens. As little rat catchers to be. Yes. And while there, Meraldine invites Luca to have a drink with her, and over that drink, she starts to spill her guts about how difficult this whole situation is for her. Girl boss of all girl bosses who hides her emotions in the iron grip of her ribcage and will not let you see them unless you pry them open from her cold dead body with a knife, is now spilling her guts to Luca.
Yes, normal behavior, yes.
Yeah, so this is very normal behavior for Meraldine. Also very normal behavior for Meraldine is drugging Luca's drink, which Luca does not notice. So he drinks it, and he gets drugged. because that's what happens when you drink a drug drink.
Drink, drug.
Yeah, say that
Drinkity,
10
drug,
times fast.
drunk. Yeah.
After which, Meraldine continues to prod Luca in an attempt to learn things about the Speak with Dead ritual, which she was present for, and why Luca was in the neighborhood of Warfred Bartosz, which she should also know, because she was in on the stakeout. She was arranging us a place to stake out Warfred's apartment, like a prime perch to facilitate our stakeout. She should know why Luca was there. She was there for the Speak with Dead ritual, so she should know what was said during it. But she continues to ask Luca questions, trying to get him to talk about these events as if she was not there. Luca, to his credit, does not give any information away, even though he has yet to click about the fact that this is not Meraldine, and if it is Meraldine, she's acting very peculiar. Luca has not clicked about any of this, but he does not tell this strange version of Meraldine anything about the Speak with Dead ritual or why he was around, which I can only imagine frustrates this fake Meraldine to no end, because you've gone all through all this trouble of luring this guy to a bar and drugging his drink, and he is still giving you nothing.
Far out.
So this all consolidates in this fake Meraldine suggesting, why don't Luca walk her down to the docks, take her back to her ship, keep her safe, which Luca of course agrees to.
Of course he does.
But at this point, everyone here knows, everyone who's not Luca knows that's not Meraldine. So what this fake Meraldine has done instead is they are taking Luca to a second location while Luca is drugged and unaware of the predicament he is in, and we have defined that as the kidnapping of our paladin. But this is also not the only thing that has suddenly been precariously perched upon which we are waiting for the outcome to likely come crashing down next episode. Do we want to talk about our theories about Warfred's potential existence, or do we want to talk about what N was doing in the meanwhile?
I think before we get to N, because it's going to build trouble for what you're experiencing, basically, while everyone has been doing stuff, Willow's also doing stuff.
Yeah, we're all doing stuff.
While Warfred has kept me waiting for the appointment, Willow has been trying to prepare themselves for what is going on. And part of that has been researching monsters, since N told me in a roundabout way that there was a monster at the actual event, and Willow is starting to piece together all of the fragments of information that they've gotten from everybody, and including Aggie, the hag, to try and figure out who or what we're dealing with. So Willow's been studying, and one of the main things that they've gotten from their study is that if we are dealing with aberrations or with the Dalkir, which is highly likely at this stage because we're thinking of things like the Beholder, and we're thinking of the Nothic, and we're thinking of symbionts, and all that kind of thing. Willow briefly entertained the idea that Warfred might be a Nothic. That was actually like something they wrote in their journal when they first found out about the Nothic, because one of the things that Warfred talked about is that he is interested in strange knowledge, but the strangeness of his knowledge is probably less esoteric and more, I want to know, I want to own your mind by main scheme, that kind of.
And I think, in case anyone forgot or doesn't know, I'm just going to briefly mention, a Nothic was involved in N's kidnapping back at the Snapdragon Theater. It was the creature that grabbed N and read their mind initially. So that is why we have an interest in Nothics, and it was an early theory that N's strange eldritch eyeball was a symbiont, which is why symbionts are also of interest to us. Carry on.
Yes, and they both have a relation to the Mrawholds, which Warfred does too, so Willow's kind of like running through their mind like, are you a person? Or are you a monster? Or do you have a monster? Like, it's curious. So basically Willow's at this moment relatively convinced that there was a person that could either become a monster on cue or is a monster in disguise as a human or is a shapeshifter. So they've been trying to study this angle. What they've determined is a whole bunch of stuff about aberrations and a whole bunch of stuff about Dalkia via Damon and also via their own study and just thinking. And whatever. One of the solutions that they came to, possibly, was doppelgangers, which are not actually in the aberration part of the book, but are in the shapeshifter part of the book. And they don't... There are questions about whether they count as aberrations.
Mm-hmm.
But they do have the ability to read minds. They are naturally not... They don't have any humanity as a concept. So, like, they just don't get it. They're there to... What was the way I wrote it down? Actually, I've actually wrote it in my book. Doppelgangers, humanoids, monstrosities, hotly contested debate because they could count as an aberration, medium to small humanoid. They are featureless blue-grey humanoid with pearly white eyes. They read minds and then impersonate people. They only read surface thoughts. And I didn't write anything else in my book. That's useful. So,
but you'll notice two factors there that could relate to Warfred.
Yeah. And also, in retrospect with Warfred, one of the things I want to point out too is that, first of all, his insistence about removing my mask, if he is a doppelganger, is horrifying, because he might have just been trying to see my organic face, because they can't imitate and like changelings and other shapeshifters can't imitate Warforged.
Mm-hmm.
They can't like imitate structure. Like N can't imitate Luca's prosthetic.
Yeah.
It'll be flesh shaped as a white arm, you know?
Yeah.
So that's sus. And additionally, remember when he was staring into the middle distance? And remember, now that he is asking Miraldine, like, oh, what was said at the Speak with Dead ritual? It sounds very much like he's like, what did Tarek say? Did he incriminate me? Am I in trouble?
Uh-huh.
At this stage, we highly suspect that it's aberrations and Dalkia, which brings us back to the question of who and or what is Alonso. Take it in!
Yes. So, Alonso. As we have previously pointed out, Alonso is attached to Edmund insofar as being his butler, and now he has been left behind in Regalport. Edmund has left, and Alonso is still here. And one of the things Alonso is pursuing as he remains in Regalport is the sculpture of one Jaylee Hazelwood, which is the artist that N began to befriend because they saw Alonso and Edmund take an interest in her artwork and being concerned about any sort of connection with these fuckos, and decided to insert themselves into the situation and get close to Jaylee just in case they had any sort of nefarious intentions with her, be that Snapdragon related or just exploiting her in some other way, especially because she is something of a timid soul. So fast forward a bit, since the gallery itself, and has been continuing to nurture this relationship with Jaylee, and has told Jaylee at this point that if Alonso or Edmund ever contact her again, to let them know, because they essentially want to be involved in that, because they've warned her that these people might want to take advantage of you. And so, to that end, Jaylee does write, and when Alonso contacts her again in regards to purchasing the sculpture that they originally, that Alonso and Edmund were originally interested in, because due to the undead attack and other such incidents that took place at the gallery that night, the selling of the auctioned art pieces did not go through. So if Alonso wants her sculpture, which Edmund technically won in the bidding, he has to go to the source, and so he does. So he visits Jaylee and inquires about the sculpture, and Jaylee buys some time because at this point she has been told by N to contact them if Alonso ever has any further correspondence with her, and so she does, and N takes that whole situation by the reins and is like, okay, if Alonso is gonna be persistent about this, then I will use this as my opportunity to suss out what Alonso's possible intentions with Jaylee are. Because at this point, N cannot confirm one way or the other if their intentions with Jaylee are sinister, if it's just a normal art dealing, if it has anything to do with the Snapdragons, if it has something to do with Edmund just being a weird fuck and wanting to take advantage of an artist who is maybe doesn't have the experience or backbone or, a ability to say no to someone like Edmund Beckett. Just any of that, and just wants to be sure about what the situation is because they are concerned for Jaylee's safety. So they arrange to meet with Alonzo via the guise of being Jaylee's agent. So they are going to meet with Alonzo and discuss the sale of this sculpture and just act as a third party to help ensure Jaylee is making the right decision for her piece, So, and Jaylee agrees to this, and they arrange a meeting with Alonzo, Jaylee, and N. And this is the first time N will be directly speaking with either Edmund or Alonzo. So this is technically the first time N is having direct contact with anyone who has potential Snapdragon associations. Again, Alonzo's exact association with the Snapdragon is not entirely confirmed, but through connection with Edmund, we can certainly make assumptions. Now, there are a couple things that I will remind you about Alonzo that make him suspicious in ways beyond just his connection to Edmund. One we have not mentioned is that N did attempt to read Alonzo's mind at the memorial. Not deeply, but just the surface thoughts. And though nothing that Alonzo was thinking on a surface level was particularly incriminating or odd in any way, there was a quality to it that N could not identify, and it was described at the time as an accent, but that is not entirely accurate to what it is. It was just some strange quality to his thoughts. And that's not normal, and that adds on to the fact that we discovered earlier that he is absolutely swathed in transmutation magic. So there's something going on under the surface of this guy. Something about his thoughts and something he is covering with transmutation magic. There's something wrong with him.
No offense, but what the fuck is up with you?
So there's reason to believe that we're not dealing with just a guy. That there's something else going on with him. So additionally with the Edmund thing, it's all of that. And for the first time since they saw Edmund back in episode 10 is finally making direct contact, but not to start shit, which is a huge development for N.
Yeah, really.
And literally just set up this appointment to try and suss out Alonzo and Alonzo's intentions. That was their baseline goal with this. But what ended up happening to perhaps both Alonzo and N's credit at this point. No one started a fight, but we did have a little conversation, him and I, where he essentially revealed that he recognized N not from the gallery, not from the memorial, not from breaking into Edmund's hotel room, but from Sharn.
You wouldn't have happened to spend any time around Sharn, would you?
Not in a long time.
Curious.
Aye? Someone impersonating me over there?
Perhaps not. But then again, there are many changelings in Sharn.
There certainly are. And that is significant in a few ways. One is the Snapdragon Theater did their whole kidnapping performance and burning in Sharn. That was where that whole incident initially took place 5 years ago. And N has not worn the face, and the Changeling has not worn the face they are currently wearing in Sharn ever. So there is no way that Alonzo could recognize N from Sharn if he was only basing his thoughts on what he was seeing before him.
With regular eyes.
Yeah. So if he was just looking at N as they were, using the name they were using and the face they were using, there is no way he should have been able to link that back to Sharn in the way he did. So, to add on to the little stack I've made of something is wrong with this guy, that's another thing, that he has been able to recognize N from Sharn. And due to his connections to the Snapdragons, Edmund, the most significant one, that is troubling. That he has recognized N, probably from the Snapdragon Theater, probably as the sole survivor of that incident. He didn't do anything about it at the time, and in fact was like, let's not get into that in front of Jaylee with N, but N has since left the presence of Jaylee. And we don't know what Alonzo's going to do about that now that he knows the sole survivor of the Snapdragon incident is running around Regalport and is definitely talking to Alonzo like they have a secret.
They are. It's so cool of them. And scary. I want to give the audience some context as well. This is on the 2nd of Nim, so the 2nd day of the month. About 4 days prior, maybe 3 days prior, N was crying on the floor of the bathroom saying they're going to read my mind and it's all over.
Yep.
We shared a hug and went to a funeral and had made a friend, and they are now on such a fucking wicket that like 3 days later, they are like, oh yeah? Me? Little old me? You know me from Sean? No way. There's a lot of changelings.
That's odd.
Yeah, it's weird.
Someone impersonating me? Huh?
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it?
I know. I do want to bring attention back to 2 other things too. When we first learnt about N's Snapdragon incident, and I do love that it's called the Snapdragon incident because it's literally like the theater burnt down. You are the Snapdragon incident.
Yeah, I am.
My God. Like, I love that. Because putting it into context now, we've been calling them the Snapdragons for so long that, that like, the scope of them is huge. But then referring to you as the Snapdragon incident kind of equalizes that in a way, which I love. I just love the we're kind of a big deal energy that undercuts all of our characters.
Yeah.
You know? Like, it's funny because it's always in a bad way, but we are kind of a big deal. Like,
I mean, burning down the Snapdragon Theater isn't all bad.
Right? So true. Well, then, like,
No, I know what you mean.
No, I just feel like saying, like, Luca's presumably involved in some Karnathi War Knight captain shit.
Yeah.
That is also possibly related to the same Order of the Emerald Claw stuff we were talking about earlier. Willow seems to have personally upset a prince of a pirate fleet. And thus the entire fleet, to the point where Varys is like, what did you do that would upset them all that much? And Willow's like, Willow is also an incident, yeah? And N, similarly, is an incident report, and I just love us.
We all probably have newspaper articles about us.
Yeah, honestly.
In some indirect way.
Yeah. I'm just so fond. Okay, so anyway, back to N. One of the first things we learned about them was that when they were in the Snapdragon Theater, their mask was removed, which is to say that the persona they were wearing at the time was stripped away, which basically reverts them back to their, like, unchangelinged self.
Yeah, their base form.
It's like a blank slate.
Yeah, white skin, white hair, white eyes. It's just...
Yeah, marshmallow N.
Yeah.
So in the Photoshop document, they deleted all the layers. Well, they didn't delete them, because you still have them, but you know what I mean. Yeah, you have backups.
They put them in a folder and shut off the eye icon.
Visibility. No, they gave you a new eye icon.
Yeah, you don't need this one anymore.
Yeah. Oh my God. So that's something. And also remembered. Correct me if I'm wrong. You remembered the Snapdragon pin from that moment? Or just around?
Around. It's been described to me as seen, like, during that night. A little, like, a little more arbitrary than just a specific moment.
Yeah. And I'm also going to bring up Damon, because after Willow's first appointment with Warfred, when they were feeling very unsettled by how invasive the way he was looking was, like, kind of, can you see through my mask, which I realize now is a recurring thing. Like, N has been seen through, Willow has been seen through, question marks around Luca.
Luca wasn't wearing a mask to begin with, so it's like...
Yeah. Luca's Luca. Luca's seen for what he is and abducted
Luca was
for what
kidnapped.
he is. So. Yeah.
I like you for who you are, kidnaps you.
Oh my god. So, what Willow ended up going to ask Damon was like, is there any magic that would make people like able to see through stuff like that? I can't remember exactly how Willow worded it, but Damon was like, eh. And then Willow ended up rolling a Megamind moment and like encountering things like True Sight.
Mm-hmm.
To which Damon was like,
Seems
what
unlikely.
Yeah. Both of us with very different reactions or interpretations of how Damon responded. Because Damon was essentially being like, okay, if you're thinking of True Sight, then why the fuck are we still in town? If there is somebody in town that has something like True Sight, leave. Like, that's his answer to all of these like Dalkia questions and the Beholder questions, and Willow being like, well, what if somebody had this strange esoteric ability? And he's like, don't engage with them at all. What if I'm currently engaging with them?
With a stick poking the hornet's nest in front of Damon, like, saying it's too late.
Yeah, Willow's actually canonically said that. When he said, don't put your neck on the chopping block, and Willow's like, what if my neck's already there?
Essentially,
you
did say something like that, yes.
Yeah, so the reason I bring that up is because that's kind of, like, we don't know any confirmation yet about what Alonso is capable of, but that was, like, one of the only answers we could come across of, like, what is he capable of? I don't know, maybe that? And that's fucked, because Damon's scared of that.
Yes, and I will detail the fact that N had an umpire's coin at the time of this meeting with Alonso. So, and that coin detects if any magic is used on you during whatever predicament you find yourself in. And that coin did not detect any magic used on N during that encounter. So, whatever Alonso used to see through N, it was not a spell that he cast on them. It was, therefore, possibly a magic item or an innate ability.
Yeah. Alternatively, no, he was looking at you at the time. See, I was going to say possibly he scoped you out prior because he seems to just pop up in places. And I assume that he's been given instruction to see what we're doing. So I just kind of expect that he's around. But he did have, like, he was looking closely, right?
Yeah, he kept staring at me. That was detailed every time I did insight checks on him, is that he was looking at me.
Yeah. Very closely. It's so...
And at the time, that was what N wanted, was the attention to be taken off Jaylee and put squarely on them, and that's exactly what happened. So, N was very chuffed because this is exactly what they want. For better or worse, that hasn't changed.
No, yeah, you're right. It's come to the point where I will say, even from Willow's perspective, because Willow's been trying from the side, I wouldn't even say from the sidelines, from the not directly under Midani thing. They've been trying to kind of pace everything out.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of Willow's perspective is about trying to time it right.
Yeah.
So that things fall in line at the appropriate times.
Yeah, they made a whole mind map, and
accelerate.
they really keep track of the overall scope of what's going on. Not just the now, but how pieces are going to fall in the long term.
Which is why I use the word chess master with Willow, just because they do, like, they plan for a billion different outcomes. And one of the main things I keep talking about with them is the idea of either stalling or accelerating the pace at which information is being delivered, or the way that things are being revealed, which is interesting because the last time we stepped away from Willow, they were being kept on the back foot at Warfred's pace, which is presumably they aren't going to stand for that very long. So,
yes, Warfred has been keeping them waiting for like 4 days at this point.
3 days, yeah. Because it was like on the evening of the 27th, and then I waited for the 28th, and then the first passed, and then now it's the 2nd, and I'm like,
too long, either way.
Yeah, very long. So, what was I trying to say about that? So, like, the initial intention, like I was saying before, was to play keep away with N as much as we could. But at the same time, now that we're really in it, there is a sense from all of us, maybe with the exception of Luca, because
he's kidnapped.
Been kind of just he's kidnapped, and he's kind of just following our leads in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things is like, even Willow is saying it's kind of reaching a peak now, and so they don't disagree with N doing that. Like it's not the kind of thing where it's like, oh, but I said to stay out of the way. It was like a wait for the opportune moment.
Yeah, don't just blow up at the gallery when we don't know anything.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by the pacing of it, how it's worked out very well, because there's been a lot of unspoken trust stuff between like the trio, in that Willow is kind of saying, trust me, I'm working in favor of us over here, but I can't tell you. And then you guys are literally contractually not allowed to tell me what you're working on.
Yeah. And
it's like a,
and is also trusting you to interpret the information they are figuring out how to feed you. Because though N is contractually obligated not to speak about the case, they have their contract bound to Madani to not speak information about the case. It will magically show up on the contract if they do. But N has found a loophole of consulting Willow to ask just, I don't know, arbitrary questions about magic and monsters, which probably don't mean anything, but I'm just curious. And Willow's smart enough to pick up on the fact that N is talking about the case and what might be involved in the case. So they might not have the exact specifics, but Willow is intelligent enough to put together a puzzle without all the pieces.
Oh, thanks. And I do love that so frequently N and Willow are talking in like low-key code to each other. And Luca's like, what?
Yeah, Luca just breaks through that entire like veneer. Asks the very blunt question.
Yeah, and sometimes almost breaks his contract by accident. He didn't tell me in so many ways. He did kind of, but I didn't hear it. He told us that he was on a stakeout. But he also said, oh, well, N will be back in 4 hours and then I'll be out for 4 hours. And Willow's like, right, yeah, well, you're on stakeouts then, aren't you? Like, where else are you taking 4-hour shifts? Like, you're either guarding someone or you're staking out. He's so cute. I miss him. He's not dead. Rom, did you want to scroll down to the evidence list part and we'll just like recap gently?
Yeah, let's go through our evidence. And yes, so we have the technical verbal testimony of the victim himself, Tarek, through the Speak with Dead ritual.
Yup. So that's the soliloquy that we referred to?
Yes. We have the tendon found under Tarek's fingernails, which was part of the autopsy report. And that tendon was found to not be humanoid, so it's very likely monster tendon. The poison used on Tarek, the mercury poisoning, was found in multiple gifts from Meraldine to Tarek, laced in makeup and cosmetics and ink pots and so forth.
God, she really spoiled him.
Yeah, it feels indicative of something. Yeah, you've got the portrait there, so Warfred has access to Tarek via the portrait, like continued access.
I'm gonna put here as stuff we haven't found yet.
Yeah, the weapon that was used to cut Tarek's stomach, because he was found gutted, as well as propped up by the eye sockets. We haven't found Tarek's eyes.
If they are still out there somewhere.
Yeah, this is presuming they weren't like eaten or otherwise eliminated from reality.
Alright, so not found yet is Tarek's eyes, if applicable. Weapon used to gut him.
As far as the autopsy goes, it was described as a weapon, not like a claw.
So we could find that.
So it's plausible that that is something that we could find.
Both which might be in Warfred's basement.
I guess, like, technically, Kelson's eyes haven't been found either. Like, if you want to not believe the story of vermin eating them.
Oh! Let me add one more thing. Okay, on the way out, when I went to the Gilded Brush, Willow had suspicions about the anonymous painting. Willow asked there, does anyone know who was behind the anonymous painting? And they say no. And then when Willow is specifically speaking to Warfred, they say, do you know anything about the artist behind the anonymous painting? Warfred also says no. I did an insight check that.
Mm-hmm.
I think because I was freaking spooked by his bloody everything or whatever. It was at the end of the meeting,
which makes perfect sense. But what on the flip side of that coin, and Luca, who are working with Brina, the Donnie detective, learned that the painter was Kelson. The painter of the anonymous painting at the gallery was Kelson, who was the first victim who got this ball rolling. Really?
Yeah, she is Kelson.
So we have reason to believe Kelson's eyes were also removed by means that were not vermin. So there's, the distinct possibility that Kelson's eyes are somewhere else, if not with Terex. So I present that as a possible source of evidence.
I'll be honest, I kind of half expect that either they are put behind the eyelids of Warfred's closed eyes masks, because Warfred makes death masks. Like, he couldn't be more on the nose. Or they're like, I've always imagined them like floating in a jar like pickles.
Yeah, that's also how I tend to imagine them too. That's my default.
Like cocktail onions. Literally.
Yeah. So, speaking of olives. Speaking of stealing olives from the art gallery.
I also, quick thing.
Yeah.
I love to think that Warfred's out there like, oh, maybe this Warforged suspects me of killing Kelson. Interesting. When Willow's like not aware that that's Kelson at all. Like, I will admit when Willow, like, is needling at something deliberately, Willow did not expect that Kelson is the missing artist. But yeah, that's fun and fucking funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So, is there anything else we have as, like, evidence at this point?
Let me check my sources.
I mean, I guess I don't know if this counts as evidence, but there is, like, the discrepancy in his alibi.
Yes, I agree. I think that counts. Let me just open it.
So,
because there are like spoken contradictions.
Yeah.
And I think that they're worth mentioning. Because even my evidence list is basically all testimony. Like, so if let's say verbal evidence.
Yeah, you also have the little tidbit you got at the scuttlebutt, which kind of falls into a similar category.
Things like, okay, so you noticed a discrepancy about Wilfred at the gallery. Would you mind mentioning it?
Yeah, so what Anne observed in terms of Warfred's movements at the gallery is that when we were all being herded into the auction hall, Warfred was ahead of us, and he entered the auction hall first before Anne or anyone else in their group. That includes Willow, Luca, and Damon. Warfred was ahead of us, and he was already seated by the time we got in there. However, in Warfred's testimony to Brina, he says that he observed Meraldine and Tarek arguing before he went into the auction hall. And if he was to witness that, he should have witnessed that when Gil was present, or at least around the same time as when Gil was present and speaking with Tarek and Meraldine. So him being the first one and already into the auction hall before the rest of us doesn't add up, because he should not have been in there if he was also observing that argument, because Willow went straight from that argument back to us and into the auction hall. There was no opportunity for Warfred to pass us by and get ahead of us or in line at that point before then. So he was already in the auction hall, and he witnessed something he should not have been able to witness.
Did you behold something that no mortal eyes should have seen? Or whatever you said. No, and that's interesting too, because there's a funny, not funny, haha. Willow wasn't able to give testimony that evening. In a way, in retrospect, I was laughing because there's a possibility that Willow might have been also put up under suspicion because they were the last person to speak to Tarek. And like there was a thin possibility that if they came forward sooner and were like, oh yeah, I spoke to him, I was the last one to speak to him, I saw them argue, that they could have been more like in trouble. So I like the idea that they have not actually had any testimony with Brina yet. They have written it up. I can tell you guys from the background, they have a written testimony for Brina. They haven't dropped it off yet, in part because of what I was mentioning before about the pacing and the timing of everything. So the information found its way to Brina via N, but they don't have actual like tangible evidence until Willow puts it in writing. which I think is interesting. So we have that kind of hanging in the air until that comes through. But you are trusted for now anyway. And there's just like all of these stacking little pieces because Willow's testimony is what will be used to contradict Wolfred's, which I'm so glad that I'm ruining your life in various ways.
Really is a perk.
So, yeah. Other verbal incriminations are that these are kind of all in Willow's thing, which is Alonso and Wolfred speaking, but that's more like trying to drag Alonso into it. And also the tip-off at the scuttlebutt. Proof that Wolfred was behind the gossip. Which isn't incriminating on its own, except it makes him look embarrassing and stupid. But if you combine that with his ulterior motives, it definitely sounds sus. Oh, we're going to add to this.
The tangible, the tampered with article.
Oh, yeah, true.
Is also a piece of evidence. Like something it can't be directly connected to anything yet, but it's definitely a suspicious element that I would consider evidence. I would put that in my court record if I picked that up.
Journalist's article was tampered with. Letter from Edmund found in Tarek's apartment shows Edmund's interest in the folly, buying the folly, and the business card. Alonso and what's his face? Wolfred working together.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna add to not found yet, Snapdragon pin. Or pins.
Yeah, we found it on Wolfred.
Yeah, I know. Willow also wrote in their journal, like...
have it. We only have testimony insofar as the pins. Like, and has...
Yeah, that's why I've...
Yeah.
Put it under not found yet.
Yeah, makes sense. And has told Brina about the pins, and the Tarek's testimony about the pin makes the fact that if we do find a pin on someone, that is pretty damning evidence.
Yeah. The thing is, Willow's also written in their book, unless he has his name engraved on the back, it's not damning on its own. We need to find it in his possession or on his person.
Yeah.
Willow was like, I could cut a square out of his jacket if I needed with the thing attached.
Hey, I can respect that. I respect the hustle.
There's a fair few ways that we can try and pin this on them. I think conspiring to kill Tarek is one thing. And then actually killing him is the other thing. Proving that they have the capacity to as well. But then that's going to be like, by the way, Willard, like going up to a microphone and being like, so I'm going to tell you about aberrations. I've prepared 400 worksheets for everybody here today. But more or less, that's our evidence list, I think. So long story short, like at the end of all of this, our prime suspect, Wolfred. Obviously, for the actual tangible murder of Tarek Elham, Wolfred is our prime suspect. So much so that we are having to recruit Miraldine so that she doesn't go kill him. Because she's like, okay, so you are suspecting the artist. He had every reason. He had every opportunity to kill my boyfriend. So I reasonably must now stab him to death.
It's the only logical conclusion to come to, really.
Yeah. And then Audrey was like, how about maybe don't do that? Because then you have the same problem because you've killed a pleb. You've killed a swabby. And then Miraldine has been tempered, but let that sword be a sign of how very guilty Wolfred is seeming right now. And maybe, unfortunately, Wolfred might be the scapegoat by which the other two managed to get away. If we aren't careful. Which is, by the way, as well, why Willow is keeping their details from Brina. This as an aside. We were first concerned that Vaelia and Dragovich were going to take like the fall for it, and that like once they were captured, it would be like, investigation's off. Edmund, everyone, leave town. You successfully got away with murder. But it's not seeming that way. And I would say that Alonso hot on our coattails kind of feels like it might be proof too that we are on the right track. Otherwise, why would he be wasting his time with us?